Aya, this child really worries me, if only she were half as sensible as you. Annie Reeves felt a pang of bitterness in her heart. Was she sensible? Wasn't she currently causing her mother to worry? This child, really. It's fine here, and back home, Mother welcomes Dr. Thomas Carter's frequent visits. Lance Carter looked up. Aunt Xia, I thought you were serious. Hearing these words, Bella West felt a surge of Anna Walker's and excused herself to get the soup ladle, going into the kitchen to take deep breaths. Both guests and hosts enjoyed a pleasant dinner. Afterwards, Susan Harris cleared the kitchen, while Lance Carter volunteered to peel apples, the thin, unbroken peels falling onto the plate, curling into larger and larger spirals. He speared a slice with a fork and offered it to Annie Reeves first, then to Bella West. Turning back, he recounted amusing hospital stories to Annie Reeves, while Bella West ate silently, the cold apple slices traveling down her esophagus, chilling her to the core. Lance Carter didn't stay much longer, soon saying his goodbyes. Annie asked him to walk Bella West downstairs, but Bella West said she wanted to stay a little longer. After Lance Carter left, Bella West sipped her tea, making small talk, until finally, her impatience broke through. She tapped her finger against the rim of the cup, glancing at Annie Reeves. Annie, do you think Lance Carter is particularly kind to you? Annie Reeves, unfazed, closed her eyes tiredly. Bella, are you writing a screenplay here? Which character are you? Cinderella or the Lost Princess? Bella West's lips curled into a sardonic smile, just asking. Don't you have any thoughts about a gentleman like Lance Carter? Bella, what nonsense are you talking about? You're a married woman. Besides, have you ever seen a 27-year-old Cinderella and a 42-year-old prince? Strangely, the clouds of uncertainty in Bella West's mind cleared, and she returned to her usual virtuous self, chattering non-stop until Susan Harris, yawning repeatedly, went home. Through the closed door, Annie could still hear her friend's voice echoing on the stairs. Annie Reeves smiled faintly, she didn't need to ask. She already knew Bella West's ideal type. With only one room and one bed, mother and daughter had to share. Susan Harris, tired from a long day, quickly began to snore. But Annie Reeves lay awake, unable to sleep. In front of her mother, she pretended to be cheerful. It wasn't that she was accustomed to luxury, or that she minded the small space, it was simply that she couldn't make this place feel like home. In this house, she was alone. From today onwards, she and Victor Walker were officially separated, and divorce would follow. After that, she would be completely alone. Being single again was like reheating last night's soup, the taste wasn't that different, but upon closer inspection, something was missing. It wasn't the same as before marriage. It turned out that being alone forever wouldn't feel like anything at all. Suddenly going from 2 to 1, the silent loneliness crept in, engulfing her in an instant. She thought she was prepared to accept everything, but actually doing it required a period of adjustment. Still, she never considered backing down, only feeling a slight pang of sadness. Her phone, placed beside her pillow, flashed. Lance Carter had sent a message, telling her that the dinner was delicious, he had arrived home, and would read a bit before going to bed. She smiled, not replying, letting Lance Carter think she was asleep. Later, she checked her phone again. Silence. No calls, no messages. Glancing at the clock, midnight, she sighed, clutching her phone tightly, forcing herself to close her eyes. There were some friends in this world you never had to wait for. Above, a sliver of moon hung shyly from the treetops, its gentle light spilling down to illuminate a dew-kissed car parked in front of the market. Inside, Victor Walker lay back in his seat, lighting a cigarette like a stick of incense, letting it burn down to a nub before taking a drag. Oh. Annie Reeves pursed her lips. You two haven't even started anything yet. How do you know Bella isn't right for you? Lance Carter chuckled and shook his head. Annie, I'm 42, not 24. I'm past the age of impulsive decisions, and physical appearance doesn't hold the same sway over me anymore. I've already been through a failed marriage. If I were to rush into another one, I wouldn't have waited this long. If I don't meet the right person, I'd rather be alone. What kind of person is right for you? As soon as the words left her mouth, Annie Reeves regretted them. Had she overstepped? Lance Carter's dark eyes were deep as the ocean. I think I'm not far from her. In the twilight of early winter, with the lights off, the room was damp and dim. She and he sat facing each other, listening together to the violin, its music like poetry, like a whispered story. If there's hope, the heart will listen. Between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, food stalls would line the streets outside the market, offering snacks from all over, their bustling activity signaling the start of the night market. Annie Reeves was used to the noise, but now, sitting alone in her study, she felt a long-accumulated sadness welling up inside her, urging her to do something. She reached for paper and pen, but after writing only a few words, a soft knock reached her ears, so faint that it would have gone unnoticed if she hadn't been listening intently. Opening the door, she found Victor Walker standing outside. Unsurprised, she calmly looked at him. Her vacation was ending soon, it was time they met. "Is your mother not here?" he asked anxiously. "Come in." "Straight from work?" She stepped aside. He shook his head. "I won't come in." "Can you come outside?" He quickly scanned the interior, taking everything in. The room was too small. If Susan Harris were here, there were things he couldn't say. Annie Reeves hesitated for a moment, then turned back inside to grab her coat. It was the 26th day after her surgery, and she was recovering well. Going downstairs was no problem. Victor Walker opened the car door. She considered sitting in the back but then decided to sit beside him. The car pulled out of the complex, heading towards West City, an area with many schools, wide roads, and less traffic. "Why outside?" "We can go to my place." "If you don't want to see me, I can go back to my parents," Victor Walker said. She chuckled softly, looking out the window, avoiding his gaze. He remained silent. Her phone rang. It was Lance Carter. "Strange, why not a text? Why aren't you home?" Lance Carter asked immediately. "Just taking a walk, getting some fresh air." "Did you put on a coat?" he asked gently. "I'm not a child. I'll call you back later." "All right, don't stay out too late." Lance Carter hung up. After a moment of silence, Victor Walker asked, "Who's calling?" "A friend of mine." The car flew down the empty road. Victor Walker stared straight ahead, his handsome face grim, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The atmosphere in the car was suffocating. Annie Reeves shifted in her seat, idly counting storefronts. Something felt lumpy beneath her. Reaching down to smooth the cushion, her fingers brushed against something cool and silky. She leaned over and slowly pulled it out. A lacy, provocative pair of panties dangled from her fingertips. A long silence followed, thick enough to freeze the air in the car. The blood drained from Victor Walker's face, leaving it as white as a sheet. "If living with me makes you this miserable, then, fine, let's get a divorce." Victor Walker broke the silence, his voice low but firm. It wasn't easy, it felt like grasping at dust. "All right, see you tomorrow at 8. I need some air, it's too stuffy in here." "Don't wait for me, I'll catch a ride back later." Annie Reeves smiled and opened the door. A gust of cold wind slapped her face, making her shiver. She couldn't stay in the car any longer. What more could be said? Whether intentional or not, she had seen those pink panties. They were like a loaded gun, a stark reminder of her situation. His pride might be wounded, but she couldn't worry about him. Her own heart ached. Without looking back, she walked along the side of the road. She heard the engine start, then speed past her, frantically racing ahead. When it was out of sight, her shoulders slumped. Leaning against a roadside tree, she slowly slid to the ground. The wind whipped through her coat, tangling her hair, as she sat numbly. 10 minutes passed, then another 10. Nearby students stared curiously, whispering and giggling before sauntering off. Dusk settled, and streetlights flickered on one by one. Her limbs were numb with cold. When her phone rang, she couldn't bring herself to answer it at first. It kept ringing until she finally picked up. "Annie, aren't you home yet?" Lance Carter's gentle voice came through the phone. "No, I'm out," she replied, feeling something rise in her chest, a lump forming in her throat. It felt slightly itchy, forcing her to swallow. A bitter taste lingered, though she couldn't place it. Lance Carter chuckled. "What's around you?" She looked up. Big trees, buildings, students, no streetlights. Well, there's one dead streetlight. "My eyes are playing tricks on me, he, she giggled foolishly. "Alright, stay by that streetlight." The line went dead. She curled up, continuing to sit, her face stiff with cold. After an unknown amount of time, she heard the screech of brakes behind her. A long arm scooped her up from the ground, its warmth briefly touching her cheek. "Lance Carter, you're amazing. You found me so quickly. I walked so far I got lost." The car's heater blasted, warming her to the core. Lance Carter gently stroked her hair, strand by strand. "Now, I'll take you home, okay?" He wasn't from Xinjiang, and with so many schools in Xinjiang, to find one specific, unlit lamp, he'd circled the streets for a good 3 hours, not daring to tell her it was now almost 11 o'clock. "Okay. Lance Carter, everyone else who's a doctor is busy as hell, how come you're so free?" She tilted her head, asking him. "Before, when I was abroad, in Beijing, I was also very busy, constantly working overtime, night shifts, unconsciously, my body became exhausted. It was to get a proper rest that I agreed to come to Xinjiang. When you're young, it's not a problem, but after 40, you realize how important health is. That's right, it's so much better to live well, there's still time to do everything." She nodded her head like a pecking chicken. Not long after, the car entered the residential complex. People go to bed early these days. Annie Reeves looked up at the darkened apartment building, blinking. "Lance Carter, I can go upstairs, you don't need to carry me." Lance Carter chuckled. "I've been busy all day, how could I possibly carry you?" "Alright, you go on up, I'll come bother your mom another day." "Okay, drive safely." She waved, turning to climb the stairs. The hallway lights were dim. She climbed step by step, each lift of her leg seeming to drain her strength, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It took nearly 20 minutes to reach the 6th floor, crawling like a reptile to her door, fumbling for her keys. The apartment was freezing. This morning, seeing her face, Susan Harris had hurriedly packed her bags and returned to the small town to check on her stocks. Closing the door without turning on the lights, she bit her fist, thinking she could hold back, but she couldn't anymore. Tears, like broken pearls, fell in heavy drops. Tears streamed down her face like rain. Suddenly, she heard the doorbell. She thought she was hallucinating, but the ringing changed to urgent knocking. Her teeth chattered, tears still clinging to her lashes, as she stumbled to the door and opened it. Lance Carter stood outside, worried. "I saw the lights were still off, I was worried." "Annie, are you?" She didn't say anything, but opened her arms wide, like a drowning person grasping at a log. She threw herself into Lance Carter's arms, tears streaming down her face, quickly soaking his shirt. Lance Carter sighed softly, his chin buried in her hair, holding her tightly. "Annie, let me take care of you, okay?" Trembling. In a world of over 5 million people, the number you meet is perhaps only 500, 1/10,000th. Those you understand are maybe 5, 1 billionth. The one you marry, just one in 5 billion. Writing these numbers on paper, you'd have to add several zeros. How long would that be? 2 people, 1 lifetime. You have to cross thousands of mountains and rivers to finally reach that person's side. Fate, for anyone, in any country, in any era, is sacred. How much regret must there be to sever this fate? Actually, it wasn't that serious. Fate is hard to come by, but it's also easy to lose. Annie Reeves smiled bitterly, looking down at the clock on her phone. 5 minutes to 8. She was early. The office opened at 8:30, and the doors to the marriage registration office were still closed. 20 minutes later, Victor Walker arrived. He didn't look too bad, at least he'd shaved, and his clothes were buttoned correctly. They looked at each other, silently nodding. "Have you had breakfast?" Annie Reeves asked. "Yeah." Victor Walker pursed his lips, carrying a leather bag from the car. "Yesterday I had my lawyer help me with the divorce papers, the division of real estate, cars, savings, and other things. Do you want to take a look?" "I don't need the house or the car. I have my savings. There's no dispute over property between us. You don't need to come home today. I'll pack my clothes and leave the key on the table. Remember to put it away." "Oh, did you bring the photos?" "Yes." A sardonic smile played on Victor Walker's lips. The gates to the marriage registration center were open. The young woman Annie Reeves had met before was there to assist them. She looked them up and down. Everyone else was scrambling to register for marriage. She'd never seen anyone come to get divorced so early. They must have really couldn't stand it anymore. The divorce process was simple. The clerk took Victor Walker and Annie Reeves's identification cards, checked their marital status and divorce application, and asked only one question: "Do you have any outstanding debts or business disputes?" Victor Walker and Annie Reeves both shook their heads. The clerk stamped their marriage certificate, then handed them each a blue divorce certificate. Annie Reeves slowly accepted it. From start to finish, it hadn't taken more than 20 minutes. Her marriage to Victor Walker was officially over. They left the registration center, one after the other. Victor Walker opened the car door. "When are you going back to work?" "The day after tomorrow." Annie Reeves smiled faintly. Victor Walker said, "Can I give you a ride?" Annie Reeves waved her hand dismissively. "No need. We're not going the same way." He turned his car to the left, and she turned to the right. "Annie." Victor Walker suddenly called out to her, "You're right. We both have the right to our own happiness. It's good that it's over. If it didn't end, how could there be a new beginning?" With that, his car zipped away. Annie Reeves shrugged, feeling a sense of relief wash over her, like a bird caged for too long, yearning to fly. She stood on the grassy roadside, looking up at the vast sky. Sunlight poured onto her face, bright and warm, making her features come alive. She squinted, seeing wisps of clouds drifting through the air through her eyelashes. Gradually, tears began to flow. She pulled out her phone and called Linda Reeves. They hadn't been in touch since she'd crashed at her place. Linda Reeves was still asleep, half awake when she answered the phone. "Lin Dong, I'm divorced." Have you found a place to stay?" "Yeah, I rented a place." "Lin Dong, how have you been these past 2 years?" Linda Reeves's lover had left her for his ideals. Key Veen was the last project Linda Reeves had collaborated with him on. Staying in that apartment was a way to feel closer to that love. Same as always. "Annie, life isn't as hard as you think. Today, you hurt, tomorrow you might still hurt, but eventually, there will be a day when time will heal all your wounds. What you've lost, someone will return to you with interest. Happiness isn't far away, it's just hovering around you, waiting for you to be worthy, and it will know to approach you on its own." Or as they say, women after divorce become experts in the field of marriage. The "In Marriage and Out of Marriage" column in the magazine is really popular right now, and your writing is so good, want to give it a try? Linda Reeves was eternally optimistic, always moving forward. Her words made Annie Reeves laugh. She hung up the phone, her steps home much lighter. Annie Reeves felt like her divorce from Victor Walker, officially effective tomorrow, was already a reality today. She wanted to spend the day quietly alone. She went to the market, bought some groceries, and busied herself in the kitchen. By noon, she had prepared several dishes, poured 2 glasses of wine, and set 2 pairs of chopsticks. She sat down, filled a glass, then raised it. "Victor Walker, here's to your successful career and fulfilling life." She drained the glass in one gulp. The strong red wine, unfamiliar to her palate, was so bitter she had to open her mouth slightly. Then, she moved to the opposite seat, picked up the other glass. "Annie, here's to you, to living for yourself, to confidence and happiness." Another gulp emptied the glass. After several such rounds, the food remained untouched, while the wine bottle was half empty. Her face flushed, eyes sparkling, she felt the room spin, giggling as she continued her solitary game. The red wine wasn't high-proof, but its effect was potent. Annie Reeves didn't know how she got to bed, sleeping from day into night before waking up. Looking at herself in the mirror, she saw a slightly pale face, but definitely not as white as a turnip, withered and lifeless. Today was busy. Returning to her former home, she was appalled by the splendid scene before her. Victor Walker really had a knack for it. Just a few days after leaving, he turned the large house into a place where you couldn't even fit a foot. Clothes were everywhere, on the floor, the sofa, the table, shoes were scattered left and right, instant noodle containers piled up in the bedroom drawers, and 2 chopsticks lay on the bed. Annie Reeves sighed, took off her coat, and went from room to room, collecting trash, dirty clothes, and soiled sheets, throwing them into the washing machine, then hanging the clean laundry. As evening approached, she was so tired she could barely straighten her back. The house finally restored to its original state. Standing on the spacious balcony, inhaling the faint scent of clean laundry, she suddenly paused, gave a self-deprecating laugh, turned around, found a large suitcase, carefully folded all the clothes, placed each item inside, put the house key near the entrance, put on her coat, and left. The suitcase was too big for the bus, so she called a taxi. As the taxi passed a pastry shop, she involuntarily sighed. As soon as she got out of the taxi, she saw Lance Carter pacing downstairs. "I went to pack my things," she said with a smile. "Have you been waiting long?" "Just arrived." Lance Carter took her luggage, not going upstairs with her, but putting it in the car. "Come on, let's go celebrate." He opened the car door for her. "Celebrate what?" "To celebrate your starting work tomorrow, and to celebrate Miss Try turning 27 today." Lance Carter gently pushed her into the car with a smile. "How did you know?" "Yes, today was her birthday, and also the day her divorce from Victor Walker became official, a day she wouldn't be able to forget even if she wanted to." "Can I not answer that?" She curved her lips. Of course he could. Was she going to force him to answer? Lance Carter booked a table at the Seine River restaurant, along with a birthday cake and a bouquet of vibrant red roses. Throughout the evening, amidst the flickering candlelight, Annie Reeves's smile remained elusive, or perhaps it was just a forced one. Unintentionally, her thoughts drifted to Victor Walker. If it were Victor Walker sitting across from her now, without candles or roses, even if it were just 2 bowls of noodles, she would have been overjoyed, her heart's desire fulfilled. Yet, it was another man fulfilling that role. Western dining was always more about form than substance, but that's what made it interesting. Frankly, it provided a sense of formality. She recalled how, regardless of what they ate, the knives and forks were laid out on the table, blue silk elegantly wrapped around the silverware, waiting to be unfolded before her, the slender stemmed glasses, the aroma of red wine filling her senses, intoxicating even before the first sip. Lance Carter knew Annie Reeves had gotten divorced yesterday, but he didn't bother her last night. He knew she wanted to be alone, so he didn't even send a text. Today was a new day, and regardless of what Annie was thinking, he could finally start pursuing her properly. Dishes arrived one after another, soft music drifted through the air. They chatted quietly, occasionally exchanging smiles. As Annie Reeves sipped her warm milk, she thought to herself, Lance Carter has really put a lot of thought into this, I should at least try to appear happy. At some point, a tall, slender, beautiful woman appeared at their table. Light purple sunglasses covered half her face, but Annie Reeves still recognized her. Bella. Bella West, with a face as cold as stone, said nothing, grabbed a glass of red wine from the table, and splashed it at Annie Reeves. Don't act like a saint, you and Naomi Bennett are the same kind of people. Bella West pointed directly at Annie Reeves's face and yelled. There's no such thing as a 27-year-old Cinderella and a 42-year-old Prince Charming. You're treating me like a monkey, playing with my feelings. Humph, no wonder you divorced Victor Walker so suddenly, turns out you had ulterior motives all along, how vicious. Annie Reeves felt like she'd been struck, stunned and dazed, wine dripping from her hair onto her clothes. Bella West, Lance Carter stood up. Apologized to Annie Reeves. Why? You guys can do it, why can't I? Bella West sneered. You have no reason to say those things. Lance Carter raised his voice, and all the diners in the restaurant looked over. A man who always seemed gentle, once truly angry, was also frightening. Bella West stared at Lance Carter's cold face and couldn't help but shiver. What am I to you? Lance Carter glared at her with a strange look. You. I. Bella West stammered, her face flushing red, speechless. I am, 1, not your boyfriend, 2, certainly not your husband. Who gave you the right to throw a tantrum here? Our relationship is just acquaintance, not even close friends. I appreciate your feelings for me, but I really can't reciprocate, and I've made my position clear. Besides, Annie Reeves and I, 2 single people having dinner together, what's wrong with that? Annie Reeves, she's your good friend, you know what kind of person she is, right? You're criticizing her with such nonsense, is that how you treat your friend? I truly feel sorry for Annie Reeves, she doesn't need a friend like you. Lance Carter, don't say that. After a long while, Annie Reeves finally regained her composure, taking a napkin to wipe the wine off her face. It's easy to lose your mind when you like someone, I understand. Bella, it seems like this is the first time you've been so serious about love since we met. She turned and smiled at Bella West. Bella West gaped, avoiding her gaze, turning her head away, incredibly embarrassed, wanting to slap herself. Between you and Lance Carter, I'm an outsider, I won't express any opinions. Bella, love can't be one-sided, it has to be both sides moving forward together. You and Lance Carter aren't what you think. Today is my birthday, these roses are just birthday flowers, they don't have any other meaning. Bella, sit down, let's have dinner together. Bella West froze, bit her lip, then spun around and ran out the glass door. The storm had subsided, and even this small incident would eventually fade into the night. Annie Reeves' hair and the front of her dress were stained with wine, a shocking, blood-red color. Lance Carter, furious but maintaining his composure, took his jacket and draped it over Annie Reeves, paid the bill, and escorted her out amidst the stares of everyone present. Don't be like that, I'm not that fragile. See? This is what they call love makes you blind, the power of love is truly terrifying. Annie Reeves sighed. Lance Carter was at a loss for words. Annie Reeves, I should take the blame for this. Perhaps I shouldn't have held back that day. If I had been more firm, she might have given up. It's not that you're wrong. Bella's very proud. Even if you don't love her, as long as you don't love someone else, she might accept it. But if you reject her because you have someone else, she can't bear it. It's like a wife catching her husband in the act. She has no other choice but to vent her anger on the mistress, pulling hair, crying, and making a scene. I'm a prime example. She smirked, a self-deprecating smile playing on her lips. Women can be so pathetic sometimes. That's a deep analysis, but I still think she was deliberately causing trouble. Annie Reeves took a deep breath of the night air. How could she not feel the same way? The restaurant was in a bustling area, with the parking lot across the street. They had to cross the road to get to the car. Annie Reeves stood at the edge of the road, looking around, frowning. Lance Carter took her arm. Aren't we going? Let's go. She reached out and took Lance Carter's hand firmly, a sense of peace settling over her. Once in the car, she heard her phone chime with a new message. It read, "Sorry. Happy birthday." It was from Bella West. She chuckled dryly. After tonight's events, a certain distance had grown between her and Bella West. Bella was an expert on women, but it was all just theory written on paper for others to read. In this situation, she was no different from any ordinary woman, only capable of foolish acts. Female friendships are fragile. The moment a man is involved, they vanish like smoke. Naomi Bennett with Victor Walker, Bella West with Lance Carter. At this moment, they weren't her friends, but her rivals. This kind of rivalry was far more terrifying than any enemy. Enemies inflict external wounds that can eventually heal. Friends, however, inflict internal wounds, invisible yet cutting like a knife. Lance Carter drove up, and they got into the car. He drove slowly, glancing at her occasionally. Annie Reeves, besides my mother and daughter, there are only two types of women in my life, casual friends and the woman I love. I hate ambiguous relationships. If I can't give someone what they want, I'll be upfront about it. Similarly, if I like someone and they can't give me what I want, I'll respect that and not bother them. I know you're not ready for a new relationship yet. Although my feelings for you haven't developed overnight, I can wait. Annie Reeves hadn't even finished speaking when Lance Carter hastily interrupted, "Don't say that, it'll make me miss out. I'm 42, and a 30-year-old man eager to marry is different. I missed out a long time ago. To put it romantically, I've been through so much already, a few more months or years, I can accept it." He suddenly lowered his voice. "I didn't want things to move too fast and scare you, but Annie, looking at you, I'm truly worried. Today was just a simple birthday dinner, don't overthink it. I'm divorced, I understand your feelings. Annie Reeves, we're just friends now." What more could she say? She sighed softly. The car stopped in front of her apartment building. The weather was chilly. Lance Carter carried her luggage, escorted her upstairs, watched her unlock the door and turn on the lights, then said goodbye, not putting her in an awkward position. Leaning against the windowsill, she watched Lance Carter start his car below, then drive away. A tear fell from her eye. Men really are children, aren't they? Must they wait until they're in their 40s to grow up? Unpacking her luggage and putting away her clothes, she glanced at her phone. It was midnight. Her birthday had passed, she was another year older. She gave a wry smile. She needed to prepare for work tomorrow. She hadn't used her handbag in a while. Flipping it open, she found the divorce papers inside. Oh, the divorce agreement. Why didn't she have a copy? Suddenly, she remembered. No, wait. She hadn't signed it. She'd forgotten that day. Forget it. Having it or not, it made no difference to her. She took a shower and slept dreamlessly. The daytime sky was clear blue. Just after arriving at her office, the director called her in. "Did Bay upset you?" The director smiled at her. "She called me last night, going on and on, wanting me to ask you about it at work, then apologize on her behalf, saying no matter what, don't abandon her." Annie Reeves laughed, "It wasn't that serious." We were celebrating my birthday last night. We both drank too much. Who remembers drunken words? The director gave a small sound and looked her over carefully. You haven't gained any weight this month. You look pale and drawn. Are you worried about your husband? We're divorced. The director was stunned, then hugged her. All right, focus on your work. I know quite a few outstanding young men. I'll bring you some photos in a few days. Annie Reeves laughed and pushed her away. Show them to Bebe first. She turned and went back to her office. At a glance, she saw a red wedding invitation on her desk. Frowning, she opened it and read it. The area around her eyebrows furrowed. William Carter was getting married. But last time, hadn't she heard William Carter call his girlfriend Stella Clark? How was the bride's name Grace Fisher on the invitation? Was Stella Clark a nickname? During her lunch break, she called William Carter. He answered quickly, his voice sounding chaotic, as if he were in a crowded place. Hello, Annie. You're hard to reach. Did you see the wedding invitation? Yeah, you must come. No need for gifts, your presence is enough. Where am I? I'm at the Jiangda Overpass Construction Bidding Press Conference. Victor Walker is here too. I have to go on stage to host the conference soon. Gotta go. Annie Reeves irritably hung up the phone. Wasn't William Carter working at the city's construction department? What was he doing there, presiding over a conference? What had happened? She wasn't one for deep thought, so she didn't dwell on it. Hearing that Victor Walker was also at the press conference, a reflexive shiver ran through her. Naomi Bennett would definitely be by his side. She and he had divorced, their work had returned to normal, she just changed her residence. It seemed like nothing had changed at all. He was doing well, and so was she. Annie Reeves didn't know that after returning from Beijing, William Carter had switched jobs, leaping from deputy director of the construction department to director of the Xianjiang City Transportation Department. In official circles, this was called a promotion, but everyone in the bureaucracy knew that the step from deputy to director was a huge leap, as difficult as ascending to heaven. Many people toiled until their hair turned white to reach this position, but William Carter was only 32, his future wide open. In the blink of an eye, he'd become the object of envy and aspiration. No delicious pie ever fell from the sky. Last month, the construction department welcomed a new office director, seemingly around 27 or 28 years old. Her appearance and figure were ordinary, her beauty below average, but she seemed gentle and well-behaved, plus she had a significant background. She was the daughter of a high-ranking government official, recently divorced, the specific reasons were unclear. The construction department's leadership team met a few times, and the office director met William Carter several times. Frequent interactions blossomed into something more. Director Michael Scott acted as a matchmaker for William Carter, who was currently courting the sister of the city committee's office secretary. He was taken aback by this development. The director laid out a clear and persuasive argument, analyzing the potential gains and losses for William Carter. After careful consideration, William Carter made a swift decision. He took Stella Clark on a trip to Beijing. Coincidentally, Stella Clark, fond of leisure and unwilling to have children, was a clear source of future worry for him. Using this as justification, he broke up with her. Stella Clark wanted to make a scene, after all, she had been with William Carter for many years. Her brother, however, having somehow gotten wind of William Carter's recent romantic prospects, advised her to let it go. Immediately after breaking up with Stella Clark, William Carter became close to the office director, and talk of marriage quickly followed. At the same time, the director of the Xianjiang City Transportation Department was caught in a compromising position, leaving the position vacant. Many people then saw that Xianjiang City organized an assessment of William Carter and several other young officials. After evaluation by leading officials and a secret ballot by the public, William Carter, with the highest score, smoothly took over as director of the Xianjiang City Transportation Department. Upon assuming office, William Carter had the honor of presiding over a significant event, the press conference for the Jiangda Overpass construction bidding. This was a prestigious affair, attracting numerous media outlets and television stations. Even the Central Television Station sent reporters. William Carter combed his hair neatly back, revealing a smooth forehead. He wore an expensive suit, a flower pinned to his lapel. His slightly heavier build suited his current position, exuding the dignified air of a leader. William Carter, smiling, nodded greetings to each attendee. On the stage, the leaders of the Jiangdai Overpass Construction Steering Committee were all seated, but the conference would officially commence only after the commander-in-chief arrived. A little man intoxicated by success. Naomi Bennett, along with the CEOs of the construction companies, including Victor Walker, sat in the middle, observing William Carter's expression. A bitter feeling, like soaking in vinegar, lingered in their hearts. All he knows is how to cling to women. What other skills does he have? She sneered and turned away, thinking to herself, if they hadn't divorced, wouldn't she be the bureau chief's wife now? Oh well, she wasn't destined for that life. However, as long as she could win Victor Walker over, she could forever hold her head high in front of William Carter. Thinking this, she glanced sideways at Victor Walker. He was focused on the documents in his hand, his expression calm. He wasn't surprised by William Carter's meteoric rise. To climb the ranks in officialdom, one doesn't need excessive competence, but rather connections and opportunities. Find the right path, seize the right opportunity, and everything will fall into place. A commotion arose in the hall. Many people stood up, applause erupted from all directions. Victor Walker looked up. Entering from the doorway was an official with a bald head like a land god. Everyone flocked around him like stars around the moon. This was presumably the project's commander-in-chief. The man clasped his hands as he walked, like a figure from the martial arts world. Apologies everyone, for Hong's tardiness. Commander Tong had to go abroad. Currently, I am in charge of the project. A collective "oh" resonated through the hall. The most astonished person seemed to be William Carter, the conference chairman. He appeared so stunned, his face contorted, that he couldn't even manage basic courtesy. Director Bach, the conference can begin now. Commander Blake sat down and said to William Carter with a smile. William Carter finally regained his composure, his face alternating between pale and flushed. He forced a smile, his hands still trembling as he held the documents. He then read the texts haltingly, noticing the suppressed laughter from the audience. Victor Walker frowned. Did William Carter really need to be so nervous in these situations? Glancing sideways, he noticed Naomi Bennett beside him, her gaze fixed, her face pale. Sitting next to her, CEO George Miller, with a beaming face, quietly said to Naomi Bennett, after the conference, "Go greet Commander Blake. Best to invite him to dinner." Naomi Bennett's smile looked more like a grimace. She lowered her head, not daring to look at Victor Walker. Victor Walker stroked his chin, legs crossed, casually flipping through the documents, as relaxed as if on an outing. The press conference was a mere formality and ended quickly. The other companies scrambled to purchase blueprints and pay deposits. William Carter, wiping sweat, stepped down from the podium and approached Victor Walker. "Hey, got a cigarette?" William Carter's mood was utterly foul, as if he'd just lost a battle. "In the car," Victor Walker said. "Then come sit in my car for a bit." The two men walked out, one after the other. Victor Walker, reaching the door, turned back. Naomi Bennett and CEO George Miller were shaking hands with Commander Blake. The way Commander Blake was looking at Naomi Bennett, as if undressing her with his eyes, made Victor Walker think of one word, lewd. William Carter dragged on his cigarette, finishing half of it in one puff, his complexion finally returning to somewhat normal. "What's up? Did you see a ghost?" Victor Walker rolled down the car window, letting the cigarette smoke escape. Fucking hell, it's no different from seeing a ghost. How the hell is that old geezer the commander-in-chief? William Carter gritted his teeth. Familiar? Familiar? I know every hair on that old bastard's head. Victor Walker chuckled, shaking his head. Naomi Bennett worked in the management department of Tuikien Construction, but her main job was socializing. Young, beautiful, quick-witted, and eloquent, no one could keep track of how many contracts the CEO had signed thanks to her presence at these social events. Some women Naomi Bennett's age in the company couldn't help but look down on this kind of work. And rightly so, they thought. Such a tedious job, fraught with pitfalls, even if it didn't address the core issues, who could say it wasn't a form of disguised prostitution? But Naomi Bennett didn't see it that way. A beautiful woman who didn't let men admire her might as well stay locked up at home. Everyone, while criticizing others for being promiscuous, would flatter others to get money for cosmetics and fashionable clothes. By the time they reached 60, they'd be arguing about healthy eating and weight loss, not daily intimacy. Women had to utilize their immense charm to promote economic development and accelerate social progress. So, she didn't feel ashamed, on the contrary, she felt proud. Every time she stepped into that expensive car with the CEO, she would strut and sway her hips, as if wanting to flaunt it to the world. Tonight, however, her performance was a bit off. Commander Blake hadn't embarrassed her, declining the Tanjong city government's reception to attend Tuikien Construction's banquet. The table was laden with renowned wines and delicacies. Naturally, Naomi Bennett was seated next to the leader for convenient care. Usually, she would have excelled at this. But tonight, 2 more guests had appeared at the banquet, causing her immense anxiety. How could she handle this? William Carter, having spent years navigating the bureaucratic landscape, had honed his honey-mouthed, viper-hearted tactic to perfection. CEO George Miller had only politely invited him to accompany Commander Blake, never expecting him to actually show up. Appearing kind on the surface, but harboring malicious intentions. During the banquet, he was overly enthusiastic towards Commander Blake, his fawning attitude making the commander feel right at home. After a few drinks, they were calling each other, brother. Brother, since we're in the same trench, to win this battle, we must have another drink. Commander Blake raised his glass towards William Carter, his expression full of hidden meaning. All right, here's to you. William Carter's face flushed slightly as he drained his glass in one gulp. Commander Blake also drained his glass with gusto, his cloudy eyes fixed on Naomi Bennett. Under the table, his hand snaked towards her, settling between her thighs. Naomi felt his touch grow increasingly bold, a thrill coursing through her. This was exhilarating. What was once a clandestine affair was now happening openly, right in front of their subordinates, right in front of William Carter, the man he'd once forced to his knees. Now, he could indulge in these base acts with Naomi, a simple act of dominance and gratification. Naomi Bennett, her face flushed from the alcohol, her eyes dreamy and vibrant, was taken aback by Commander Blake's actions. She pressed her thighs together, glancing fearfully across the table at Victor Walker, her eyes wide with apprehension. Why was Victor Walker here? She couldn't afford to offend Commander Blake, though. Under the table, she tried to push his hand away, but he grabbed her wrist, unzipped his pants, and pushed inside her. Shock froze her, her eyes went wide. Victor Walker, remember this old friend? Commander Blake looked up, a smirk on his face, his Adam's apple bobbing. Naomi Bennett trembled, speechless. He could bring her to the brink with just his hand. Of course, Manager Walker always speaks highly of you, chimed in some of the Shui-Jian construction board members, exchanging knowing glances. Naomi Bennett, her hand gripping the one caressing her leg, stood abruptly. I need the restroom. Be quick, Commander Blake said, his eyes following her. I'll be waiting. Such a loyal friend, William Carter slurred, getting unsteadily to his feet. Let's have another drink. Director Michael Scott, allow me to offer a toast to Commander Blake on your behalf. Victor Walker, who had been quietly sipping juice, suddenly stood. He walked around the table to Commander Blake's side. Commander Blake, unfamiliar with Victor, looked inquiringly at the others. Victor Walker raised a hand, silencing them. I'm a technician in charge of bid pricing at Shuijian Construction. My stomach is sensitive to alcohol, but I'd like to offer a toast to Commander Blake as a sign of respect. I'll finish mine, you can take a sip if you like. With that, he downed the contents of his glass. Dismissing Victor as an insignificant junior, Commander Blake simply raised his glass in acknowledgement and took a small sip. Victor Walker smiled and turned to leave. Please enjoy yourselves. I have a tight deadline and need to get back to work. He nodded to the others at the table and walked towards the coat rack. Seeing Commander Blake's jacket next to his, a sardonic smile played on his lips. CEO George Miller rose to see him off, while William Carter simply waved, returning his attention to flattering Commander Blake. Go back and entertain Commander Blake. Don't spoil his mood. We'll need his favor later, Victor Walker said to the CEO. The CEO shook his hand. This bidding price is a real mess. After they parted ways, he'd barely reached his car when Naomi Bennett rushed out. Victor Walker. She whined, eyeing him. It's work, I couldn't help it. She assumed Victor Walker was jealous because Commander Blake had spoken to her. Yeah, can't always do what you want in this game. Victor Walker opened the car door and got in. Naomi Bennett blocked the car door with her body, preventing him from closing it. Are you angry? Victor Walker spread his hands, turned back to look at her coldly, and frowned. Why would I be angry? Naomi Bennett sullenly lowered her head. I don't care what others think of me, as long as you trust me. I've always had great faith in your abilities. Not my abilities, my heart, Victor Walker. Wait for me, I'll just go say hello, then I'll come with you. Manager Bennett, you've had too much to drink. You can't even separate work from personal matters anymore. Victor Walker slammed the car door shut and drove off. He couldn't understand how Annie Reeves and Naomi Bennett could have ever been friends. They were completely different. If Annie Reeves had even a fraction of Naomi Bennett's possessiveness towards him, their marriage wouldn't have reached this point. But if Annie Reeves were even a little like Naomi Bennett, could he have loved her? Love? Yes, he loved Annie Reeves. He just thought love, like work, didn't need words. More ostentatiously, he wanted to prove it with his career. His career was to provide Annie Reeves with a comfortable home and a good life for her and his family. For her, he would willingly endure any hardship. But he was so focused on the results, so busy forging ahead, that he lost Annie Reeves. He always assumed Annie Reeves would be there, that he could turn back and find her whenever he wanted. What Annie Reeves had said in the car that day was a real wake-up call. In his heart, he had given everything to Annie Reeves, so of course she should love him. But he forgot to ask, was everything he did what Annie wanted? Did he even notice what Annie Reeves did for him? He was giving handouts, not putting in effort. The realization came too late. Annie Reeves had been unhappy with him for a long time, and he kept doing unforgivable things. He had no right to keep her by his side. Maybe he was strong in his career, but he was a fool in love. Husband and wife should walk hand in hand, not one ahead and the other trailing behind. Could he still make Annie Reeves happy? The first time he saw Annie Reeves, she was very thin, her clear eyes looked at him pleadingly, as if entrusting all her hopes to him. His heart suddenly pounded, and a desire to protect her arose. He believed he had the ability to protect her. Annie Reeves wasn't some delicate flower, her independence and resilience intimidated him, as if she'd thrive even without him. Victor Walker chuckled. 6 years ago, who was taking pity on whom? Out of the car, into the elevator, opening the door, before turning on the light, Victor Walker always stood silently for a moment, then illuminated the room. Everything bore the marks of his morning departure: slippers askew, pajamas tossed on the sofa, the empty dining table devoid of fruit or pastries, the spotless kitchen, the bathroom holding only a lone cup and his solitary toothbrush, a single towel on the vanity. The closet was half empty, the bed now held only one blanket, while 2 pillows remained, one belonging to Annie Reeves, the sole trace of her presence. Victor Walker sighed, leaning against a pillow. "Annie," he whispered, picking up the thin calendar from the nightstand. He wrote on today's date: Annie left home, day 4. Flipping back, he saw, Annie left home, day 3, day 2, day 1. This nightly ritual had become his routine. Today was November 20th, a mere slip of paper away from the new year. Victor Walker flipped through the calendar, hoping that next year he'd write, "Today, Annie came home." The weather grew colder, the north wind howled fiercely, bringing icy rain. Annie Reeves felt her coat wouldn't hold up much longer, only a padded jacket could offer any warmth. At work, Bella West called, asking to meet. Annie guessed it was about the birthday incident. She claimed to be busy, suggesting they meet another day. Bella West had never been so solicitous before. Her sudden attentiveness likely signaled the gravity of the situation. Annie Reeves wasn't one to hold grudges, but Lance Carter had been kind to her, and he was with Bella West now. It was awkward. Better to avoid it altogether. Leaving work, Annie was surprised to find Bella West waiting outside the Design Institute. She deliberately looked around, pretending not to see her. Suddenly, Bella West rushed forward, bundled her into a car, fastened her seatbelt, and sped off. "What are you doing? Kidnapping me?" Annie Reeves said, half laughing, half crying. Bella West roared with laughter. "Yes, tying you up and selling you." "All right, Annie, you can yell at me, curse me, whatever, but don't ignore me anymore, okay? Am I that important to you?" Annie Reeves glanced at her. "I have lots of friends, but they're just for drinking and partying. You're my only true friend. Am I really that good?" Bella West parked in front of a tea house. They entered, ordered drinks, and then Bella spoke. "Annie, don't you know? You're genuine, you treat everyone sincerely, you don't take advantage of anyone. You're good, and you don't pretend otherwise. That day, I treated you so badly. If you'd done that to me, I'd have ripped your hair out, but you never blamed me, and you still understood me." Bella West finished speaking, forcing herself to drink several sips of hot tea before returning to normal. "I'm so moved, and also jealous. Lance Carter is a Chi Tian de Sheng, a rare find. I wasn't wrong about him. Compared to you, I'm nothing." "What are you talking about? I don't understand a word. What's a Chi Tian de Sheng? You really are a country bumpkin." Bella West rolled her eyes. Chi Tian de Sheng refers to those outstanding men between 38 and 45 who are still available, perfect and excellent like a god. Such men have complex psychologies and pasts. It's hard to make them truly fall in love with you. To put it simply, don't be infatuated with him, he's just a fairy tale. But once he likes you, not to mention a lifetime of financial security, there won't be any emotional worries, and the marriage will be particularly stable. I'm 29, I've played around quite a bit, had a few lovers, but when I really think about it, none of them were right. I finally met someone I liked, Lance Carter, and you snatched him first. Oh well, it's fate. But thinking about it, it's right. My love life is still rich, I still have many admirers. To be a wife, he needs a decent girl like you. If I were Lance Carter, I'd choose you too. Alright, I've thought it through, Annie. I absolutely support you and Lance Carter. Don't say that, Bella. Annie Reeves felt a pang in her heart, knowing how much courage it took for Bella West to say those words. I'm being honest. Lance Carter was right. He's not like those men who can't give you what you want but still string you along. Lance Carter isn't like that. He rejected me very tactfully, telling me his heart was already taken. I suspected it was you, but I didn't think it was true. Annie, only if you marry Lance Carter will I accept defeat. If it were any other woman, I'd cough up blood. Annie Reeves smiled. What nonsense. Lance Carter and I are just friends. The smile suddenly vanished from her face. Romance is too far off for me right now. Don't tell me you want to remarry Victor Walker. Annie Reeves shook her head. Remarry? Never. If I had to go back to 4 years ago, I'd go crazy. I finally escaped him, I need to appreciate that. That's good. Enjoy the single life. At the very least, you better snag Lance Carter soon, or I'll sneak attack. The two women looked at each other and laughed heartily, the barrier between them gone. That night, Bella West took Annie Reeves to get her hair done, get a whitening treatment, a beauty makeover, and they gallivanted around until midnight before Bella took her home. Annie Reeves yawned as she entered her apartment complex and saw someone sleeping by the stairwell, reeking of alcohol. She nervously stepped over him, and he suddenly sat up. Annie, you're back. William Carter, why are you sleeping here? Annie Reeves looked closely in the dim light. William Carter's eyes were bloodshot, and his face was pale, as if he was extremely drunk. Come on up, make me some tea. No, not going up. You're a good girl, late at night, shouldn't let men in. William Carter staggered to his feet. Let's step outside and talk. With that, he staggered down the steps, his gait unsteady, Annie Reeves supporting him from behind. They chose a stone slab in the vegetable market out front to sit on. The night breeze blew past, and William Carter felt the alcohol wear off a bit, his mind clearing. He opened his eyes wide, staring unblinkingly at Annie Reeves, staring, until suddenly tears welled up. Annie Reeves rubbed her hands together for warmth, oblivious to his unusual expression. I bought you a dinner set, a ceramic one, it looks really exquisite and beautiful, I was going to give it to you on your wedding day, but now that you're here, I'll go get it for you, Annie Reeves said. Don't, stay with me for a bit, William Carter quietly swallowed his tears. If that love letter hadn't been delivered to the wrong person, could he and Annie Reeves have been together? If they really were together, what would his world be like now? Too bad there are no ifs in life. It's hard living alone, don't be so wasteful, I can come over. Annie Reeves smiled, seeing the supermarket was still open, and ran to buy him a bottle of mineral water. William Carter, you're acting strange today, what's wrong, something got to you? William Carter drank half the bottle of water before the heat in his chest subsided. Naomi Bennett's words, like a curse, had been swirling in his head for 2 days now, he couldn't believe it. Annie Reeves had a crush on him, he desperately wanted to see her, but he didn't dare, afraid of shattering that beautiful dream. He was rotten to the core, how could he be worthy of Annie Reeves' love? Borrowing the courage from the alcohol, he came to ask Annie Reeves if it was true. Annie Reeves still sat elegantly before him, smiling gently at him, speaking words of concern. His gaze rested on Annie Reeves' face, swallowing all his questions. Thank God for the cruel joke. He and Annie Reeves had made a mistake. He blamed himself. For his goals, he could endure any hardship, do anything bad. He could hurt Naomi Bennett without a second thought, so how could he hurt the pure Annie Reeves? If Annie Reeves were his wife, seeing him become like this would cause her so much pain and suffering. It's a good thing the love letter went to the wrong person. Annie, a tree planted in the earth, people are the same, but some grow strong, some grow crooked, that's also the human factor, not inherently bad, right? Annie Reeves blinked a few times. William Carter, what do you want to say? William Carter chuckled, tilting the bottle back and finishing the water. Annie, let me tell you, not all men are good. They eat from the bowl and look at the pot and want what's outside. There's no cat that doesn't steal food, it's just a matter of how good their technique is. You'd better protect yourself, don't be fooled by bad guys, don't get married easily. Annie Reeves covered her mouth, wanting to laugh, but seeing William Carter's serious expression, she nodded, okay. Did you come here tonight just to tell me this? I came to look for images of the past, Annie. You really are a ghost. From before, now, to the future, it's all the same. William Carter staggered to his feet, still muttering, and walked towards his parked car. Annie Reeves watched the car start but didn't follow. Annie, if anything happens, come find me. William Carter turned, his voice trembling. He'd been a bastard, he couldn't taint Annie Reeves further, he could only offer her these helpless words. Getting into the car, he covered his face with his hands, tears silently seeping through his fingers. Annie Reeves gave a small, oh, and, watching the car disappear into the distance, turned and headed upstairs, thinking that tonight had been quite a show. The sun rose, and then it set. A day and a night passed. Sitting alone at the dining table, with a simple dinner before her, Annie Reeves felt she was finally adapting to post-divorce life. Dinner alone took less than half an hour. After eating, it was still light out. She had a habit of sitting by the window, it was only at this time of day that a sliver of the setting sun reached her apartment. Watching the sunlight slowly shift from orange to dusky gray, her face gradually blurred in the twilight. Life like this was peaceful, so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat, so slow, she could count the passing seconds. No TV, no phone, evenings spent reading and listening to music, in bed by 10, then waking between 4 and 5 a.m., making breakfast, doing laundry, tidying up, getting ready for work. Her daily routine was like a pendulum clock, precise and predictable. She felt that this life was good, but in the eyes of others, it was cold and lonely. People always sympathize with the underdog. After news of Annie Reeves' divorce spread, her colleagues, knowing her character, assumed Victor Walker must have been at fault. Immediately, they rallied around her, vowing to find her someone better than Victor Walker, someone who would make him green with envy. And so, somehow, she found herself surrounded by concerned individuals. First, her office started receiving more and more unfamiliar visitors. Men would appear, seemingly out of nowhere, dressed to the nines, nodding politely, engaging in light conversation, then leaving shortly after. Other colleagues would then rush into her office, asking for her impressions. After work, another colleague would invite her to a restaurant, mentioning a gathering. When she arrived, she'd find only one unfamiliar man waiting. A few times, Annie Reeves, overwhelmed by what seemed like her sudden desirability, had to politely inform her colleagues that she wasn't currently considering remarriage. They'd retort, "Who said anything about marrying right away? First, we find you a good catch." Exasperated and amused, she could do nothing but dodge and deflect, stalling for time. Her colleagues, assuming she found the previous men unsuitable, presented her with a new prospect every couple of days. Annie Reeves was starting to get scared. She suspected her colleagues were dredging up every unmarried man in their 30s in Xinjiang. She truly didn't understand, was a divorced woman living alone against the law, or against the will of the entire world? Blind dates on a Saturday were rare, arranged by the director. She dreaded these free meals, wanting to refuse but fearing to offend the director's kindness, so she went. The director specifically instructed her to stay at least a full hour. Snow fell lightly that morning, drifting like whispered secrets. The street outside the window was deserted, the boarding house colder and quieter than usual. The meeting was set for afternoon at the Left Bank Café, with its small tables lining the street. Annie Reeves hadn't fussed over her outfit, a long black coat, charcoal gray turtleneck, and a thick, purple scarf as her only splash of color. With the snow falling, the café wasn't crowded. As Annie Reeves entered, she saw him, tall, intelligent eyes, a warm smile. A man like this on a blind date? Was he too picky, or had all the matchmakers gone on strike? Annie Reeves sighed inwardly. Annie Reeves? The man stood slowly, extending his hand. Annie Reeves nodded politely, briefly touching his hand before withdrawing hers. Patrick Steele, he said, gesturing her to a seat, his surprise at seeing her evident. I'm a television reporter. Please, sit. Annie Reeves smiled and sat opposite him. 2 steaming cups of coffee arrived. She took a sip, the flavor was rich and strong. Mr. Steele, Annie Reeves began, I know Principal Emily West cares about me, but I think. Wait, Patrick Steele interrupted. Principal Emily West is a distant cousin. She forced me into this. I came reluctantly, but now I'm thinking it's a good thing I did. Annie Reeves gaped. Reporters were certainly bold, saying anything after only a few minutes' acquaintance. What feelings could he possibly have? I came here today to. Just like me, right? Patrick Steele cut her off again. It seems we're truly meant to be. I thought elegant women were extinct, but here you are. Annie Reeves, you're a secretary, I'm a reporter, we both work with words. It's destiny. We'll have no disagreements, our core narratives aligned. Annie Reeves gaped again, a wave of discomfort washing over her. She wanted to excuse herself, but Patrick Steele preempted her. Annie Reeves, I've had girlfriends before, but they were so ordinary, painting their faces like clowns. I couldn't see their true selves. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night next to a stranger, wouldn't that scare you to death? A role in a traditional opera, Annie Reeves laughed, Reporter Chow, you're so funny. I have things to do, so. No, it's snowing outside. What could be more important than enjoying a coffee together while watching the snow? I'll tell you a really interesting story, guaranteed to make you laugh your socks off. Remember that press conference about the Dajiao River overpass construction? Yunru Media, Xianjiang city officials, and most of the important people from the Ministry of Transportation were there. The first person to speak was the chief engineer. Haha, he stood up, looked down, and put on a serious face. But you know what happened below? Annie Reeves twitched the corner of her mouth, reluctantly shook her head, and looked at the snow falling heavily outside the window, feeling very tired. This guy, Reporter Chow, is such a chatterbox. When will he ever finish? He sat down, probably wanting to take his reading glasses out of his pocket. Instead, he pulled out a pair of panties. Light pink, embroidered with roses. The faces of the people below changed, they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. He himself was terrified, his face turning purple. He gripped it even tighter. Still holding the panties, as if he couldn't believe it. The media's eyes lit up, a camera flashed. There's a video of it online, you can look it up when you're free. It's definitely the most talked about press conference ever. Patrick Steele doubled over with laughter. Annie Reeves could only blink, her thoughts seemingly frozen. Rose-patterned lingerie again? Or is it just a coincidence? Are secret rendezvous gifts now lingerie? Then what? The chief engineer is over 50, his wife is also an old woman. Could she possibly wear that kind of lingerie? Everyone tacitly understood that he must have done something romantic last night. Seems like a scandalous affair, so blatant that everyone could witness it. Or maybe he treats lingerie like his favorite handkerchief, His face pale, he finished reading the document. When he got off the stage, he had to be helped by his secretary. I heard that as soon as he got back to the hotel, he called CEO George Miller to give him a dressing down. It's likely that Shuijian Construction will be out of the running for the Dajiao Bridge construction bid. It's just a rumor, no one knows if it's true or not. The Shuijian construction workers are gossiping about this incident under the title, A Pair of Panties Leads to Injustice. Shuijian Construction again. Annie Reeves's mind seemed to clear. Could it be more than a coincidence? Could those panties be the same ones found in Victor Walker's car? Forget it, what does it have to do with you? You don't need to know. Annie Reeves looked up, took a sip of her coffee, and heard her cell phone ringing in her bag. It was Lance Carter calling from the airport. He had gone to Beijing for a medical research and discussion conference, taking the opportunity to visit his parents. He'd been gone a week and was now about to take a car back to the city center. Outside? Is it cold? Lance Carter asked. I'm at the Left Bank Cafe, Annie Reeves said, looking at Patrick Steele across from her. Lance Carter smiled, order me a royal milk tea. I'll be right there. Xinjiang City's airport isn't far from the downtown area, just a half-hour drive. Who is it? Patrick Steele asked curiously. A friend, Annie Reeves replied vaguely. Patrick Steele wasn't entirely satisfied, but he didn't press the matter, continuing to recount interesting anecdotes he'd experienced. Annie Reeves listened with a wandering mind, constantly glancing towards the cafe's entrance. Half an hour later, Lance Carter arrived, covered in snowflakes, and immediately grasped the situation. Without waiting for an introduction from Annie Reeves, he extended his hand to Patrick Steele with an air of composure. Lance Carter, Annie's friend. I'm in Beijing for a while, and it seems she has quite a few admirers. As he spoke, he casually placed his arm around Annie Reeves' waist, clearly indicating a close relationship. Patrick Steele wasn't stupid. He gave an embarrassed laugh. Mr. Cheen, don't misunderstand. Annie's supervisor is my aunt. We were just chatting. Ah, how could such a beautiful and elegant woman be unattached? Well, where were we in our conversation? Don't mind if I join in. Oh, let's have dinner together later. There's a Sichuan spicy restaurant across the street. Hot pot is perfect in this snowy weather. Lance Carter chuckled warmly, taking Annie Reeves' hand and sitting down. Annie, why are your hands so cold? He frowned. Patrick Steele touched his nose. I can't, I have an interview. Another time. He picked up the bill on the table, but Lance Carter snatched it first. Let me get this. Annie and I will stay a bit longer. Faced with this refined and imposing man, Patrick Steele could only make a frustrated escape. Once Patrick Steele was gone, Annie Reeves sighed in relief. If you hadn't come, I would have called 911. I've never met a man who could chatter like that. I couldn't get a word in edgewise. He interrupted me at least 3 times. Why didn't you say you needed to use the restroom? Lance Carter raised an eyebrow. Annie Reeves blushed, realizing she actually did need to go. When she returned from the restroom, Lance Carter ordered her a milk tea. This reporter, Patrick Steele, isn't the only one interested in you, is he? He looked at Annie Reeves with an all-knowing gaze. Yeah, in everyone's eyes, I'm a pitiful fish who can't survive on her own, Annie Reeves shrugged self-deprecatingly. Annie Reeves, you need to learn to express your feelings. Don't force yourself. Learn to say no to people. Today, I happen to rescue you, but what will you do next time this happens? If you don't like it, say so. If you don't want to, don't. If you don't want to see someone, don't. Don't worry about being polite. Don't put pressure on yourself. You have that right. Lance Carter stroked her hair. Your new hairstyle isn't bad. You look much more vibrant. I don't want to see you right now, Annie Reeves suddenly looked up and said. Seriously. Lance Carter was taken aback for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll head back to Covenant Garden first. Remember not to stay out too late. The snow and wind will pick up tonight. I'll text you. He stood up, bent down to pick up his luggage, and only realized he'd been tricked when he heard Annie Reeves stifle a giggle. You mischievous little thing. He chuckled, settling back, not mentioning the few flutters his heart had just experienced. I know, Dr. Thomas Carter. You start lecturing me the moment we meet. I won't let myself fall into such an awkward situation again. Come on, let's go get hot pot. It's on me, so you can enjoy the fresh air. But we can only choose a moderately priced one, I'm relatively broke right now. Perhaps it was Lance Carter's age and indulgence that allowed Annie Reeves to be so naturally playful and witty in his presence, like a little girl, seemingly rediscovering a joy she had lost long ago. It's rare for you to offer to treat me. I won't let you off the hook. Lance Carter looked at her indulgently. After paying, they walked out of the cafe, chatting and laughing. Lance Carter took Annie Reeves's hand and led her across the street to the Sichuan spicy house. At the entrance, he gently rubbed her cold hand and brushed the snowflakes off her forehead. The warm touch on such a cold day deeply moved Annie Reeves. In the snowy twilight, the snowflakes swirling in the air became softer under the streetlights, even the faces of the mannequins in the shop windows seemed to come alive. Because of one person, the whole city felt more romantic. Undeniably, she was a bit reliant on Lance Carter. The snow intensified, and vehicles moved cautiously on the streets. Near the Sichuan spicy house, at an intersection, two cars collided, causing a traffic jam. Trapped in the gridlock, Victor Walker impatiently honked his horn, boredly scanning his surroundings. Suddenly, his gaze fixed on a window. He rubbed his eyes. He wasn't mistaken. The woman who had just smiled was his ex-wife, Annie Reeves. And the man picking up food for her was Dr. Thomas Carter. His heart lurched. What was he witnessing? His face hardened, his gaze unwavering, his handsome features clouded with a frosty expression. He picked up his phone. Attorney Robert Grant, have you finished revising that agreement? Ever since he saw the scene at the Sichuan spicy house, Victor Walker's expression hadn't changed. It was so unpleasant that anyone who saw him wanted to steer clear. They had been divorced for less than a month, and already a new man had appeared beside Annie Reeves. How timely. But Dr. Thomas Carter wasn't just a new friend, he was an old friend. If it was an old friend. Victor Walker's face alternated between pale and livid, his eyes fierce, as if he wanted to devour someone. Sometimes, he wouldn't speak a word all day. Other times, he'd take out his frustration on sets of data, tearing them to shreds. The tension in the office was so thick that no one dared to breathe. Daisy Green, worried about him living alone, urged him to move back home. He refused, only occasionally returning for a meal. Principal Dean Walker would just snort whenever he saw him, treating him like air. At the dinner table, father and son wouldn't even glance at each other. Daisy Green sighed and said, "Victor Walker, your aunt called me today. She said there's a young woman at her workplace who just returned from studying abroad. 29 years old. Should we set up a time for you to meet?" My goodness, even 2 years older than Annie. I'm busy, and I don't want to see anyone. Victor Walker replied. Daisy Green put down her chopsticks and tentatively asked, "So, do you think there's any hope of getting back together with Annie? Mom, do you think she and I are just not living together?" Victor Walker pushed his bowl away and stood up. "I'm full. I'm going back to my study." Daisy Green continued to ask, "If you can't remarry and you won't see other women, do you intend to stay like this forever?" Daisy Green. Principal Dean Walker slammed his hand on the table. "It's his business. Don't worry about him anymore. He has money, you don't need to bother." Victor Walker gripped the door frame, his body suddenly stiffening. He bit his lip and walked downstairs. On his way back to his study, he received a call from Naomi Bennett. Her voice was urgent, asking where he was and if it was convenient to meet. He said directly that it wasn't convenient. Naomi Bennett said she really had something urgent and asked if she could come to him to talk. He chuckled coldly and hung up the phone. Victor Walker and Naomi Bennett arrived at the study almost simultaneously. The first-floor study was in disarray, with staff busy moving cabinets and desks to prepare for a new office in the innermost area. Hiring more people again? Naomi Bennett asked as she went upstairs. Yvonne West, opposite her, looked at her with disdain. The two stared at each other for 10 seconds before looking away. Victor Walker nodded once, as if in answer. Entering his study, Victor Walker retrieved a large cardboard box from inside the room, then placed the sorted documents from the drawers and desk inside, one by one. Naomi Bennett clasped her hands together, leaning against the desk, looking at him as if studying something. You rushed here in such a hurry, what's so urgent? Victor Walker spared a moment to look up. Naomi Bennett's face suddenly flushed, and she placed her hand over Victor Walker's busy one. Victor Walker, today the Overpass Project Committee said the architectural design wasn't qualified and officially rejected Tui Kien Construction's bid. The deposit has been returned. Actually, it was Commander Blake who, having no other outlet for his frustration, found a way to make things difficult for Tui Kien Construction to vent his anger. Victor Walker looked at her without blinking. So I don't need to prepare the bidding plan anymore. Just in time, we haven't signed a contract, and there's no advance payment. Victor Walker, you don't seem surprised by this news. What happened with Commander Blake was your doing. Naomi Bennett's face was as red as a beet. A smile at the corner of Victor Walker's mouth became more pronounced. What do you mean? Naomi Bennett remained silent, her face as red as it could possibly be. After a tense moment, she reluctantly spread her hands and blurted out, no need to pretend. You deliberately put my underwear in Commander Blake's pocket. Still feeling a bit embarrassed, she changed her wording from panties to underwear. Why would I have your underwear? Victor Walker's smile vanished, his handsome face frosting over. Naomi Bennett looked at him, her expression deeply troubled. Victor Walker, I admit I deliberately stuffed my underwear under your car seat. I didn't mean anything by it, just wanted to leave you a souvenir. What a unique souvenir, Victor Walker said slowly, his tone laced with sarcasm and mockery. I'm just afraid the souvenir you intended for me wasn't just this item. Are you taking revenge on me? Naomi Bennett had assumed Victor Walker was merely jealous of Commander Blake and intentionally messing with him. Now, hearing Victor Walker's tone, she realized it was absolutely not the case, and a shiver ran down her spine. Victor Walker neither confirmed nor denied, his eyes burning like torches. Naomi Bennett, I despise being schemed against by a woman. You've crossed my line. William Carter and I are good friends, and my previous attentiveness towards you was entirely out of respect for him. After your divorce, I also tried to support you in your work. But I realize I was wrong, you're too greedy. It's not about revenge, I simply returned the underwear to its rightful owner. Victor Walker, you have no right to say these things to me. A fire ignited within Naomi Bennett, and she spoke with fierce clarity, her voice filled with anger. William Carter and I are not good people either. After the divorce, neither of us owed the other anything. I was just a little unwilling, deliberately putting on an act of being abandoned in front of you. Of course, you also seemed worth the sacrifice. I'm a bad woman, no, to be precise, a despicable woman. But flies don't get through uncracked eggs. If you, Victor Walker, were truly upright, would I have had the opportunity to scheme against you? I flattered you, I fawned over you, I seduced you, didn't you enjoy it? Haven't you always secretly compared me to Annie Reeves, thinking I'm more feminine than her? That day, right on this table, right here, you caressed my breasts, took off my clothes, you had an extra leg between yours, did I force you? What support, what care? What kind of person are you, pretending to be so good to me? Is there really true friendship between men and women? You were just pretending, weren't you, wanting to get on top of me? It's just that you didn't know I was a vile woman before, and now that you do, you want to push me away and be cruel to me. Victor Walker, let me tell you, you've succeeded. Today, I was fired by Tui Kien Construction because I deliberately offended the chief engineer, potentially costing them tens of millions in profit. Hearing this news, are you feeling triumphant? A person truly unmasked cares nothing and fears nothing. Anyway, that's the story. What else can anyone do? The world is vast and full of strange things, moral judgments on such matters vary. Naomi Bennett sleeps with others for gain. If you don't like it, don't look, don't bother her. For a long time, Victor Walker remained silent. After another long moment, he slowly said, I've faced my retribution. What you're experiencing now is yours. I'm no saint either. To deal with bad people, one can only resort to unsavory methods. Victor Walker. Naomi Bennett closed her eyes. Don't you think you've gone too far? What do you gain from being so heartless? Tui Kien Construction isn't the only competing architecture firm. Victor Walker smirked indifferently, his hands still busy. Naomi Bennett gasped, her lips trembling, Victor Walker, you wouldn't do that, would you? I will. Tui Kien Construction never had the high-tech equipment to handle a large project like the Daikyo overpass. I knew that from the start, but you all hoped to use your illicit connections, to go through the back door. I wanted to refuse you from the beginning, but you did so much for me, I kept quiet. I'm still working on the bidding plan, just changing the architecture firm. Victor Walker, you're a real devil. Naomi Bennett's voice was hoarse. Not having the capability is one thing, but offending Commander Blake will make it difficult for you to win bids for other projects in the future, right? What's it to you? You're not even a Tui Kien employee anymore. Victor Walker turned from the filing cabinet. Naomi Bennett shook her head in terror. You're a murderer without a knife, Victor Walker. Fine, fine, I'll remember everything you did today. You're really just a pitiful creature. No matter how well you do, how much money you make, what's the point if you don't even have anyone to share it with? Tears streamed down her face. She had always been proud of her seductive abilities, able to get everything she wanted. She never thought there would be a day she would lose, fail so miserably. Indeed. Victor Walker nodded. Naomi Bennett's face was still flushed. She wiped her tears, glared hatefully at Victor Walker, turned sharply, Walker the door open, and stormed out. Reaching the stairwell, she saw two people walking towards her and stepped aside. Annie Reeves, walking behind, looked up and saw Naomi Bennett. Both were startled. Naomi Bennett regained her composure and smiled, long time no see. Annie Reeves looked directly at her and replied indifferently. Naomi Bennett lifted her chin, go on in, Victor Walker's in there. Oh, and some good news for you, I've finished playing with him, dumped him. He's all yours now. Annie Reeves' clear eyes flickered. Annie Reeves, honestly, Victor Walker's reputation isn't undeserved, but his skills in bed are really mediocre, incredibly monotonous. William Carter is much more powerful than him, that's why I dumped him. And there's a birthmark there, did you see it? It's really something. Naomi Bennett suddenly leaned close to Annie Reeves' ear and whispered, then sauntered away. Annie Reeves stared after her, her lips ashen. CEO Reeves. Attorney Robert Grant, walking ahead, turned back, saw Annie Reeves hadn't followed, and called out. Annie Reeves turned and replied, coming. She inhaled deeply, then again, watching Attorney Robert Grant push open the door to Victor Walker's office. A thick blanket of snow covered everything, bringing an unprecedented chill. A soft exhale could instantly freeze into ice. Xinjiang City, leaning towards the south, lacked central heating in winter, relying solely on air conditioning for warmth. The air conditioners, effective in summer, struggled in winter, even with the external ventilation whirring loudly, the indoor temperature barely rose. People typically wore the same heavy clothing indoors as they did outdoors, maximizing the use of their coats. Starting mid-December, meetings seemed to multiply. Annie Reeves had to hire additional staff for external and internal units, yet the paperwork remained perpetually unfinished. Today, the director informed her of an all-staff meeting scheduled for that afternoon, asking her to prepare a speech. She set aside other documents and hunched over her computer, racking her brains for the report draft, when the door opened. A sharp-looking man in his early 40s entered, introducing himself as Mr. Chen, the entrusted lawyer from Victor Walker's office. She stood and poured him a cup of tea. Attorney Robert Grant pulled 2 divorce agreements from his bag for Annie Reeves to sign. Annie Reeves accepted the thick documents. Glancing at the legalese on the first page made her head spin. Preoccupied with the report, she lacked the focus to scrutinize the agreements. Since she had already finalized her discussion with Victor Walker, these were likely just supplementary procedures. She flipped to the last page, quickly signed her name, kept one copy, and handed the other to Attorney Robert Grant. When will CEO Reeves return to the executive office to work? Attorney Robert Grant asked, having concluded his business. CEO Reeves? Annie Reeves furrowed her brow. Me, why should I go to the executive office? Attorney Robert Grant touched his nose. CEO Reeves, didn't you review the agreement carefully? After your divorce from Victor Walker, the real estate, cars, all bank deposits, and Victor Walker's 90% stake in the company are considered joint assets. Since you have no children, the assets are divided equally. After deductions, your share amounts to 60% of Victor Walker's office. This makes you the majority shareholder, and logically, you should oversee operations at Victor Walker's office. I'm not very clear on these matters. Annie Reeves blinked, bewildered. She didn't even want the house or bank deposits. What did Victor Walker's office have to do with her? Ms. Chi, in your free time, you should read the company law and economic law. They explain these matters in detail. Attorney Robert Grant smiled patiently. Attorney Robert Grant, you shouldn't joke. Victor Walker's office, by its very name, is clearly Victor Walker's personal property. I have no reason to be allocated shares there. Lawyers never joke. The office's name is irrelevant to asset division. As his former wife, you have this right. Annie Reeves felt like she'd encountered a two-faced individual, regretting her hasty signature. Can I refuse? You've signed it, so it's legally binding. If you want to transfer the shares to someone else, according to the regulations, it'll take at least 2 years. CEO Reeves, Victor Walker's firm is yours now. Annie Reeves slumped into the chair. She had thought that after the divorce, she would be completely separate from Victor Walker. Now, well, she had conquered the city and seized the land, becoming the head of Victor Walker's firm. What if I don't return to Victor Walker's firm to manage things? You can convene a shareholders' meeting, sell the firm, or dissolve it. Annie Reeves was at a loss for words. This path was a dead end. Does Victor Walker know about this? She rubbed her forehead. Of course. What did he say? Attorney Robert Grant paused for a moment, then replied, he accepted. Attorney Robert Grant, I don't want to dissolve Victor Walker's firm, and I don't want these shares. Can you help me find a solution that works for everyone? You and Victor Walker remarry, everything goes back to normal, and this divorce agreement becomes void. A sudden spark ignited in Annie Reeves' mind. She bit her lip. I've got it, Attorney Robert Grant. Wait for me a moment, let's go to Victor Walker's firm together. She saved the draft, turned off the computer, buttoned her coat, tightened her scarf, and left the office with Attorney Robert Grant. Victor Walker had tidied up considerably. Important documents were placed in the safe, his belongings were packed in boxes on the floor, and the clothes in the lounge were neatly folded and placed to one side. The desk was wiped clean, so much so that not a speck of dust remained, and the gleaming surface clearly reflected their figures. Annie Reeves and Attorney Robert Grant stood beside the cardboard boxes. He calmly met her gaze. I'll move these things down to my office downstairs right away. This was the first time they had faced each other like this since the divorce. There was a bit of awkwardness, a bit of nervousness, a bit of unfamiliarity, a bit of embarrassment, but they were still two people who knew each other well. Annie Reeves smiled, revealing her small, straight, white teeth. Victor Walker's heart trembled. These small, straight teeth would gleam like a dazzling ray of light in the darkness, captivating him even more. "Victor Walker, can you stop for a moment?" "Let's talk," Annie Reeves said. "Sure, CEO Reeves." Victor Walker removed the clothes placed on the chair, gesturing for her to sit down. "I just remembered an important phone call I need to make. I'll step out for a bit." Attorney Robert Grant tactfully closed the door and went outside. Annie Reeves rubbed her hands on her coat and looked up, saying, "Victor Walker, I don't know what your motive is for doing this, but you should stop now. I don't want shares in this company. I have a job, I have two hands, my mother has a pension, and life isn't so difficult that we can't get by. If you insist on dividing the assets with me, fine, I'll take half of the money in the bank. I'm afraid I can't do that. You've already signed the agreement." Victor Walker's demeanor was calm. "We can draw up a new agreement. In that case, we'd first have to remarry and then divorce again." Annie Reeves dug her nails into her skin involuntarily. "Victor Walker, do you think we'll be happy working together in the same company?" "I can do it. Can I handle this new job?" "Nobody's born knowing how to do everything, you can learn gradually." Annie Reeves abruptly stood up. "Victor Walker, all right, I want a divorce to start a new life, not to continue this ambiguous entanglement with you. I don't have your confidence that I can handle this job, nor can I guarantee I'll maintain a good mood facing you every day. You're overthinking it. You do your CEO job, I do my employee work. Our tasks are clearly divided, there won't be any overlap. I'll keep my distance, can't you manage that?" Victor Walker. Annie Reeves bit her lip. "If you don't want to destroy your Victor Walker law firm, find attorney Robert Grant and figure something out. The law is dead, people are alive. Facing you is torture for me. Just leave me alone." Saying she was useless, playing ostrich, out of sight, out of mind. Seeing Victor Walker would bring back images of him with Naomi Bennett, Yvonne West, and other women, the nightmare would continue, and she would go crazy. Victor Walker's handsome face twitched slightly. "Are you interested in someone else?" "I have the right to do so, don't I?" she retorted, her voice choked with emotion. He nodded, looking reluctant. "Victor Walker, these are the days I've always longed for, please don't ruin them. I have a speech to write, goodbye." With that, she walked the door open and dashed out. Victor Walker remained motionless. After a long while, he stood up, picked up the cardboard box, and resolutely walked downstairs. It had become a habit, Annie Reeves didn't know when it started, but whenever she felt down, she wanted to see Lance Carter. Lance Carter was in surgery. His office nurse poured her some tea, saying the 1-hour surgery was almost over and she should wait a bit. The nurse was a plump, middle-aged woman whose eyes crinkled into a line when she smiled, and she was especially talkative. She knew Annie Reeves. When Annie Reeves was hospitalized, she had visited Dr. Thomas Carter's patient room a few times. If you want to have children in the future, go to the hospital to have your fallopian tubes checked. That way, the chances of getting pregnant are much higher. Somehow, when it came to ectopic pregnancies, this nurse became very enthusiastic. Annie Reeves smiled faintly, unsure if she would ever have the chance to be a mother. "I, too, was married for years before getting pregnant, almost divorced because of it. My husband was targeted by a vixen who promised him a son, and he actually went along with it. But he didn't dare tell me, since our parents were old friends. So, he snuck around. After I found out, I knew that making a scene would just detonate the situation. No, I needed a cunning plan, a slanted brushstroke. My husband treated the vixen well, so I treated her even better. He was thrilled, charging forward bravely, and I cheered him on. The two of them were completely united, in perfect harmony. The vixen and my husband had no idea what I was up to. Seeing my feathers ruffled, the vixen couldn't take it and ran off. My old man, with no hope left, obediently returned to me. Not long after, I got pregnant, and we've been peaceful ever since. The nurse's eyes were full of smugness, a look of great accomplishment. Cowards like to sneak around, like to be stealthy, like to tiptoe silently in the dark. So I turn on all the lights, bang the gongs and drums next door, and see if they still dare to be sneaky. Annie Reeves, upon hearing this, was stunned, as if watching martial arts masters duel, where the slightest misstep meant defeat. But to protect a marriage like this, did victory mean happiness? Looking at the nurse's cheerful demeanor, it probably did. "Dr. Thomas Carter is back," the nurse said. Annie Reeves looked up. Lance Carter looked very tired. It had been a complex, 5-hour-long surgery. But upon seeing Annie Reeves, his spirits suddenly lifted. This seemed to be the first time Annie Reeves had actively sought him out. 10 minutes, he said, waving to Annie Reeves and hurrying into the locker room. The nurse laughed loudly. "I'm clearly 3 years younger than Dr. Thomas Carter, but I feel like I look like his older sister." "Women often mature faster than men," Annie Reeves said. "That's right, so it's best for a woman to marry a man who's a decade older than her. No need to worry about time, and he can still sow his wild oats and deceive other women." Annie Reeves chuckled and sighed. Was there such a thing as a marriage in this world where both sides unconditionally trusted each other to be faithful until old age? Just like how marriages are usually between older men and younger women, there are exceptions. Bella West was in love again, with a younger man, for years her junior, a trainer at a fitness center. How the romance began, she wasn't quite sure, but from the few times she'd heard Bella West talking on the phone, the love was developing intensely. Bella West was very determined not to get married. Remembering how Bella West had been head over heels for Lance Carter just last month, Annie Reeves smiled. Bella West's love began easily and ended without much heartache. Whereas she, it seemed, found it hard to love. It took a lot of effort to start, but halfway through, it died prematurely, a pain that pierced her heart. "All right," Lance Carter emerged, wearing a comfortable, loose-fitting outfit. A long, gray, goat hair coat reached past his knees, and a plaid scarf was wrapped around his neck, giving him a scholarly air. "Was the nurse in your office assigned by the hospital or did you appoint her?" "Yourself?" As they walked downstairs side by side, Annie Reeves noticed several young nurses passing by. Each one was young and beautiful, glancing at Lance Carter with respect. Lance Carter reached out and straightened her collar. "What kind of answer do you want?" "The truth. I appointed her." "Why?" "Because she's very professional and also very intelligent. She can distinguish between dreams and reality. Not to be narcissistic, but it's a precaution against something that hasn't happened yet, and also to reassure anyone who's interested in me. Although I can guarantee self-control, sometimes misunderstandings can be just as hurtful. If it can be avoided, I try my best to prevent such things from happening." Her breath hitched reflexively, her mind involuntarily drawn into the depths of the eyes before her. A mystical incantation seemed to tap rhythmically within her heart, bit by bit. "Being your wife truly makes me happy." She heard the deep sigh within herself, but the moment the words left her mouth, she wished she could bite her tongue off. "I'm glad you feel that way," Lance Carter said, pleased. "Where's the car?" "Where did you park?" she asked, feigning a look around, feeling her face flush. A hint of a smile played on Lance Carter's lips. The Land Rover was parked right behind her. They got into the car. He didn't drive off immediately, instead, he smiled, his gaze fixed intently on her. Annie Reeves lowered her eyes, avoiding his gaze. She already knew Lance Carter possessed refined, elegant eyes, but in this moment, she couldn't bear to meet them. Finally, a day off. He'd called her the past few days, but she'd been so busy that she'd had to hang up after just a few words. Work's piling up, but I don't want to think about it. Lance Carter, don't stop me today. I want to get drunk. She bit her lip hard enough to leave a mark. Lance Carter frowned and started the engine. Let's go to your place then. That way, if you get drunk, I won't have to carry you up 6 flights of stairs. Annie Reeves considered this for a moment and didn't object. Before heading upstairs, they stopped to buy some snacks and takeout from a restaurant. Her small apartment was both cramped and cold. The air conditioning seemed to make no difference. Lance Carter took off his coat and sat at the dining table, his elegant posture and demeanor a stark contrast to the humble surroundings. Annie Reeves reached for the wine bottle, but he stopped her, insisting she eat some of the takeout first. Annie Reeves had a ridiculously low tolerance for alcohol. A single sip made her wince, and one glass turned her face as red as Guan Yu's. Yet, she seemed determined, downing glass after glass as if in a drinking contest. Lance Carter quietly served her food, saying nothing, letting her be. Annie Reeves was usually so restrained, keeping everything bottled up. It was rare to see her lose control. Had something happened today? Lance Carter, do you ever think about your ex-wife? A few glasses of wine down, Annie Reeves propped her chin on her hand, her eyes glistening, a charming expression on her face. He didn't answer her directly. We're in regular contact because we have a daughter. We have a lot to discuss regarding her upbringing and education. If you didn't have a child, would you still be in regular contact with her? She was like an inquisitive child, needing to know everything. Lance Carter shook his head. No. If we broke up, we would naturally respect each other's privacy. If she had a new partner, it would be even more inappropriate to contact her regularly. Exchanging greetings on holidays and New Year would be enough. That's good. But why won't he leave me alone? Annie Reeves looked up, her eyes filled with exhaustion, pain, and helplessness. I tried to stay away. Did I really have to leave Xianjiang? I didn't want to see him, didn't want to relive that nightmare, didn't want to hear about his women. It's not that I care about him, it's just that 4 years together created so many habits I can't break. I've finally adjusted, found myself, made new friends, even tried writing, which I love. So why did he have to show up? Lance Carter's eyes flickered, growing dark. It was Victor Walker. Victor Walker came looking for her. Annie, you still love him. The smile was wiped clean from Lance Carter's face. No, no. Annie Reeves shook her head vehemently, sudden grief overwhelming her, tears streaming down her face in denial. After the divorce, I cut him off completely. So much happened, so many people, it was like being stabbed right here. She pointed to her chest, tears falling freely. He could not love me, but he couldn't keep humiliating me. Coming and going as he pleased. What does he think I am? Charity before, a puppet now. There's a chasm between us, impossible to bridge. We're impossible, Lance Carter. I have the right to live for myself, don't I? Her tone was firm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. She was terrified, cornered. Victor Walker always had the power to control her emotions. Annie, are you sure you don't want to go back? Lance Carter took her hand, his voice even, but with a clear undercurrent of anxiety. Yes. She nodded solemnly, raising her other hand as if swearing an oath, her shoulders squared, her emotions slowly settling. Today, Annie, naive and desperate, had come to him. Then don't dwell on it. Be calm, don't resist, don't fight it. Deal with what you can, set aside the rest. Annie, what do you want me to do? He looked at her encouragingly. No wonder she'd come to him, seeking shelter. She saw him as a safe harbor. Finally, she was coming to him. Lance Carter's heart leaped, a small smile playing on his lips. Annie Reeves practically collapsed onto the table. Help with what? What kind of help? The words reached her lips, but she couldn't voice them. Her father, once her mountain, had abandoned her and her mother, ascending to heaven alone, leaving her small, weak frame unable to bear the weight of their family. Victor Walker, the man she'd wanted to lean on forever, had humiliated her, forcing her to end their marriage. Who doesn't want to lean on someone? What lasts forever? Silence descended. Want me to top you up? He smiled, refilling her empty glass. Lance Carter. She slowly lifted her head, tears still clinging to her lashes. I really can't be alone. I don't know what we are, but being with you, it's like finding a joy and security I lost long ago. No worries, no anxieties. Even if tomorrow is the end of the world, or I make a huge mistake, it doesn't matter. I want. Lance Carter guessed what she wanted to say. Though it wasn't love, but seeing him as a safe harbor, she only thought of him, no one else. For her to say this, she must have prepared herself to accept him. He didn't want to miss this chance. Only by seizing the opportunity did anything become possible. His gaze softened, and he gently asked, "What do you want?" Annie Reeves startled, knocking over her wine glass. Wine spilled across the table. She tilted her head, steadying her breath, suddenly feeling incredibly selfish. I don't want this. I don't want this. Lance Carter had said, having failed at marriage once, how could he fail again? This was between her and Victor Walker. She couldn't drag Lance Carter into it. Thinking this way was unfair to him. No one could save her, only herself. Lance Carter looked into her eyes. Do you like me, Annie? Oh, why were there two Lance Carters flickering before her eyes, making it hard to see clearly? Don't move, Lance Carter. I like you, because you value me, protect me, feel my pain, like a father, like a brother, like... Thud. Suddenly, she slumped face down on the table, passed out drunk, her hair splayed across her face. Lance Carter touched his nose, chuckling to himself. He walked over and picked her up. She nestled against his hand, rubbing against him like a contented cat. He composed himself. After a moment's hesitation, he carried her into the bedroom, laid her on the bed, and covered her with a blanket. The soft feeling lingered on his hand. Pausing, he cautiously leaned down, closely examining her face. The dim light gently outlined her features, long eyelashes, a small nose, and moist lips. Aside from her steady breathing, she barely moved, clearly fast asleep. But her delicate brows remained furrowed. What was she thinking? He watched her silently for a long time, until his supporting arm grew numb. Straightening up, he whispered, Annie, you know, I've been waiting for you since you were someone else's wife. I don't want to be your father, nor your brother. I want to be your husband. He smiled, gently smoothing her furrowed brow. She stirred, turning over, sleeping soundly. Snow fell silently like white powder, dusting the unmelted remnants of the previous snowfall. Early risers left trails of footprints in the snow, which were gradually covered by the fresh flakes, erasing the marks on the old snow, returning it to a blank canvas. Lance Carter entered, carrying 2 cups of soy milk and freshly baked buns. Annie Reeves opened her eyes. A hangover pounded in her head like 1,000 hammers. She slowly sat up and opened the bedroom door. She heard footsteps in the living room, then the wheezing of the old kerosene stove in the kitchen, and the sputtering of oil in a pan. She blinked, grumbling as she shrugged on a coat and climbed out of bed, shuffling in her fluffy slippers to the living room. She stood there dumbfounded, still not fully conscious after a long moment. Lance Carter nudged her, and she finally walked towards the toilet. In the cramped bathroom, barely big enough for one person, there was an extra toothbrush and an extra towel. She squeezed out some toothpaste, and just as her mouth filled with foam, her eyes suddenly widened. Lance Carter. She remembered nothing happening last night, but her memory only went as far as before she started drinking. What happened after that? Why was Lance Carter in her apartment so early in the morning? Suddenly grasping the crux of the matter, her face first paled, then flushed with discomfort. Lance Carter. She slowly shuffled out of the bathroom, her fingers fidgeting with each other. Last night, I was really drunk, wasn't I? She lowered her head, her mind reeling. It seemed like her clothes had been changed too. Lance Carter was setting the table. He had originally intended to poach 2 eggs, but they had stuck together in the pot, so he'd resorted to frying them instead. You were pretty good, no bad behavior, just threw up once in the middle of the night. Come on, sit down, have some soy milk to warm your stomach. This place isn't so bad, you can get anything you want for breakfast. Lance Carter pressed her down into a seat. She was so embarrassed she wanted to die. Without even asking, she knew Lance Carter must have changed her clothes. Really, nothing else happened, she asked, summoning her courage. Lance Carter looked up at her and asked, what did you want to happen? His hand rested on her shoulder. Her knees knocked together, trembling. Never before had she been so acutely aware that Lance Carter was a man, a handsome man, a dangerous man, a man who made it hard for her to breathe. Lance Carter was 15 years older than her. Sometimes, she saw him as an elder, and elders didn't have a gender. The thought of having feelings for an elder felt like a transgression, something absurd. Of course, Lance Carter wasn't really her elder. He sat down beside her, enclosing her hand in his. The atmosphere last night was certainly charged, but you weren't ready, and I didn't want things to move too fast between us. I was afraid you'd regret it. But it wasn't a total loss. I heard your confession. She looked up in astonishment. My confession? What did I say? His lips brushed her cheek, a light kiss, as he caressed her trembling body. Annie, you said you liked being with me. I've hesitated because of our age difference, but I don't want to wait any longer. Annie, I really want to take care of you, for the rest of my life. She leaned against his chest, feeling as if she were enveloped by a warm, vast ocean. Victor Walker had finally succeeded in pushing her to the edge. She was late for work today. I'll pick you up after work. Christmas is just a few days away, let's go shopping. Lance Carter, having lived abroad for many years, was accustomed to celebrating holidays according to the Gregorian calendar. Along the way, he drove with one hand and held Annie Reeves's hand with the other. After clarifying everything, his demeanor towards her became moderately bolder. Not tonight, I have to attend a friend's wedding. She hadn't even processed such a leap in their relationship. Promise me, no alcohol tonight. Lance Carter retrieved her bag from the back seat. If the reception ends late, call me, I'll pick you up. Her face flushed, she nodded, still not daring to ask where he had slept last night. She feared the answer would shatter her. The director's office door was closed, voices filtering out from within, suggesting a visitor. She hurriedly opened her computer, pulled up the unfinished draft from yesterday, and continued working. Hitting save, she breathed a sigh of relief, proofread it once more, and printed it. The director's office door opened. She politely turned, a smile forming on her lips, which froze instantly. Every hair on her body stood on end. Victor Walker, his expression unchanged, nodded to her before turning back to shake the director's hand. Director, what is he doing here? Annie Reeves watched Victor Walker descend the stairs, then dashed into the director's office. The director, having put down his teacup, smiled at her. Don't be alarmed, it's business, not personal. Is there a connection between our design institute and his firm? There wasn't before, but there is now. The director's smile was suggestive. What is it? Annie, sort out your affairs. I'll find someone to replace you very quickly. Why? She asked needlessly, though she already knew the answer, hoping she was wrong. The director gently tucked a stray hair behind her ear. Because there's a job that needs you more. You agreed with him? Annie Reeves's face paled. The director nodded. A secretary can be replaced, but Victor Walker's office can't be left unattended. Director, if I handle things well over there, will you let me come back? The director smiled without answering, asking her to bring him the conference report draft. She turned mechanically, feeling like the sky was falling. The director sighed softly behind her and picked up the phone. Bae, don't casually set Annie up on dates anymore. Don't ask why, just don't. If you find someone good, keep them for yourself. Today was William Carter's wedding. The wedding was practically a Xianjiang City Convention, held at Xianjiang's premier hotel. Almost all the senior leaders were present, 50 tables in total. A professional etiquette team managed guest reception and seating. Annie Reeves's mood was terrible, but she still had to go. When they arrived, the guests were mostly assembled. William Carter and the bride stood at a flower arch, welcoming everyone. Seeing the bride, Annie Reeves felt even more alarmed. Though the wedding dress was a famous, expensive brand and the makeup expertly applied, it was still a second marriage, and the bride's appearance was exceedingly ordinary. Someone once said, if a woman isn't beautiful, she should have charisma. If she lacks charisma, she must be cute. If not cute, then she must be kind. It seemed the word fierce alone wasn't enough to describe the bride. Chin held high, eyes wide, she glanced at everyone, only smiling at William Carter. Bitterness welled up inside Annie Reeves. She held out her beautifully wrapped gift. William Carter started to thank her and reach for it, but the bride suddenly snatched it and tossed it to a bridesmaid behind her. Go inside and find a seat. William Carter's face instantly darkened. This is my best friend. He glared angrily at the bride. Just how good? The bride's eyes darted around before she suddenly lashed out. Director Bach is a senior of mine. Annie Reeves, wanting to avoid trouble, cut in, congratulations to you both. Hurrying inside as if fleeing, she heard William Carter still placating the bride behind her. Annie Reeves sighed. William Carter. Before she even entered the reception hall, a shrill, cold laugh reached her ears, laced with sarcasm. You're having so much fun, you don't care if I live or die. There's no justice in this world. All the guests in the room heard it and looked towards the entrance in astonishment. Annie Reeves turned to see Naomi Bennett, dressed in bright red, acting coy with William Carter, hands on her hips. The hotel staff, initially thinking she was a guest, hadn't stopped her. Now, seeing the situation, they hurried forward to pull her away. Don't touch me. I'm his ex-wife. Can't I come to offer my congratulations? The staff member stood frozen beside her. What are you doing here? William Carter's face contorted. The bride's eyes blazed. Furious at Naomi Bennett's status and the scene she was causing, she grabbed William Carter's arm and bit down hard. William Carter winced in pain but didn't dare make a sound. You're asking me what I'm doing here? Naomi Bennett retorted, unflinching. Did you have to do this today? William Carter's anger erupted. I thought today was an auspicious day. Give me the money that's rightfully mine, and I'll disappear immediately. William Carter's face suddenly changed. Let's talk outside. He turned back to the onlookers with a forced smile and pulled Naomi Bennett outside. William Carter. The bride stamped her foot and shrieked. William Carter turned and waved at her dismissively. I'll be right back. The light from the crystal chandeliers reflected off his face, revealing his panic and terror. The wedding march began, and the groom entered to thunderous applause. But everyone could see the forced smile on his face, and the clear imprint of 5 fingers on William Carter's cheek. The guests drank, offered congratulations, and teased the groom, but no matter what, the wedding felt like it was missing something. Annie Reeves sat at a corner table, her tablemates, seemingly friends of the bride, unabashedly comparing William Carter to the bride's ex-husband, bluntly stating how lucky William Carter was. Unable to bear it, she excused herself to the restroom, then stepped out to the lobby for some air. The clinking of glasses grated on her nerves, and she lowered her eyes. If her coat hadn't been inside, she would have left right then. "Annie, what are you doing out here?" The door leading to the lobby opened, and William Carter walked out, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. She turned, pretending not to notice the handprint on William Carter's face. After a moment of silence, she asked, "Where's Naomi Bennett?" "Gone. She's got no one to protect her now." Commander Blake had her panties in his pocket. "Now that the secret's out, it's a disaster for her. No construction company will hire her. She's used to spending lavishly, and now she's broke. She came to me for money, crazy woman." William Carter rattled off the long explanation in one breath. Seeing Annie Reeves' lack of response, he chuckled and stopped talking. Annie Reeves studied William Carter for a long moment. "You should go back inside. Don't keep the bride waiting." William Carter didn't reply, his gaze drifting to the frigid, black sky. It was going to get even colder tomorrow. "William Carter, do you love her?" She couldn't hold back the question that had been gnawing at her. "Annie, I did love Naomi Bennett. I loved her, so I married her." "And what happened?" "You loved Victor Walker, so you married him. And how's that working out?" "Love is just something naive young people dream up, a bit of fodder for poetry. It can't be real. This time, I'm marrying for my future. Marrying her opens doors for me, saves me 20 years of struggle. What's wrong with that? Besides, a wife is just an ornament. If I want a beautiful woman, I can find one anywhere." William Carter blew out a playful puff of smoke. This time, Annie Reeves didn't respond. She lowered her head, clutching her coat tighter, then walked past him back into the noisy room. As soon as she sat down, she noticed the woman at her table pointing at another table, whispering something, then covering her mouth with a captivating giggle. She followed the woman's gaze, paused, then looked away. Victor Walker was also at the wedding. He was sitting at a table with William Carter's old classmates, men who used to be close to Victor Walker as well. Victor Walker's face was undeniably handsome, serene, like a spring breeze. Any woman would be stunned by such a handsome man, but she remained remarkably composed. Annie Reeves felt she couldn't stay a second longer. She grabbed her coat and bag and, without a word of goodbye, practically fled the hall. She went straight to the restaurant entrance and hailed a taxi. Before she could get in, someone called out to her from behind. "Annie Reeves." Victor Walker called her name. Annie Reeves didn't turn around, but a tear rolled down her cheek. "I didn't even say anything. What's wrong?" Victor Walker frowned, waving the taxi away. "I just came to tell you that the Long & Company from Beijing is coming tomorrow for the Daikyo Bridge project signing. You need to be there to sign the contract." Annie Reeves felt an indescribable bitterness welling up inside her. As always, she could only bite her lip hard, until she tasted blood. She wiped her tears, walked straight ahead, and Victor Walker followed, repeating, "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, in the meeting room." Annie Reeves suddenly turned around, nearly colliding with him. "Victor Walker, if you have the guts, just devour me whole, okay?" Annie Reeves sobbed. "I'm softening, this office is the result of years of your hard work, you know I'm reluctant to destroy it. But this is just respect for someone else's labor, not attachment to you. Victor Walker, we're divorced. After the divorce, we have nothing to do with each other. My previous job, although the salary wasn't high, I gained honor from it, it was earned through my own ability, without relying on anyone, I was tired but happy. Not to mention 60% of the shares, or handing over your office to me, I'd also have to stay by your side, Victor Walker. This is something I'm extremely unwilling to do. I asked for the divorce, you don't owe me anything, let's not drag this on any longer. If my presence in the office makes you unhappy, I can leave. Managing a business isn't just about collecting a paycheck without working. If you can't do it, you won't have food to eat, it'll be 100 times harder than now, and what you achieve has nothing to do with me. Victor Walker's tone was uncompromising. Annie Reeves laughed bitterly in disappointment, truly at her wit's end. Victor Walker, I'm ready to see other men. She brought up Lance Carter. Congratulations. Victor Walker's voice held little surprise, and betrayed no displeasure. The atmosphere settled, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. In front of Victor Walker, she always felt like a failure. Perhaps it was her own sentimentality, but he genuinely seemed to be giving her a share of the assets out of conscience, without any ulterior motives. Well then, see you later. Her racing mind suddenly went blank. She put on an act, as if she had something to do, following Lance Carter's advice, appearing nonchalant. I'll take you home. Victor Walker offered politely. No. Your car, I'm scared. Annie Reeves waved her hand. Victor Walker, legally, I concede. Tomorrow, I'll go to Victor Walker's office as you wish, but I'll only stay for 3 months. After 3 months, if you can't buy the shares in my hand, I'll sell them to others. I think there are plenty of interested parties, and it's legally permissible. After saying this, she dashed across the road, walking alone towards the distant lights. Victor Walker silently watched her leave, turning around only when she was out of sight. Why soften? Because she cared. The next day, Annie Reeves arrived at the Design Institute first. Her replacement had been chosen, and the director had also arrived. She took the new secretary on a tour of the archives, explaining each drawer, when her phone rang. Accountant Richard Jones from Victor Walker's office called, asking when CEO Reeves was coming, as he had many allowance slips that needed approval. Next, it was the head of the valuation team. A new real estate company had just finished construction and was waiting for inspection, wanting to invite Victor Walker's office for valuation. In just half an hour, Annie Reeves's phone was nearly blown up by calls from Victor Walker's office staff. Secretary Chi, that's enough, if you have something to do, please go ahead. The new secretary inquired solicitously. Annie Reeves raised her hand, glanced at her watch. It was almost 10 o'clock. She hurried downstairs, and as soon as she exited the main gate, she saw Victor Walker's office's commercial vehicle waiting outside. She thought to herself, if she had been any later, would the staff from Victor Walker's office have tied her up and dragged her into the car? This time, entering Victor Walker's office, the staff didn't just nod a greeting as before, instead, they all stood up and bowed to her. Hello, CEO Reeves. Yvonne West, upon seeing her, reacted like a mouse spotting a cat, her voice trembling as she greeted her. Victor Walker's desk, located at the very back, was piled high with drawings and documents, not much different from the surrounding employees. Annie Reeves's expression was also clouded with helplessness. Accustomed to being a soldier, she suddenly found herself in command, unsure of how to direct. Victor Walker stepped forward, leading Annie Reeves into the meeting room, followed by Yvonne West, carrying the meeting documents, her demeanor uneasy. Everyone exchanged bewildered glances. In truth, few understood the alternating leadership of CEO Walker and his wife, their coordinated performance, but regardless of how they sang their duet, it didn't concern them, let them do as they pleased. 4 people from Long & Construction Company, 2 deputy general directors, a head of construction, and a head of finance, sat, sipping tea. Victor Walker introduced Annie Reeves. This is CEO Reeves of our office, and this is CEO Henry Davis of Long & Construction Company. Annie Reeves smiled warmly and gestured with her hand in invitation. CEO Henry Davis's entourage looked at Victor Walker in astonishment. At the bidding meeting 2 days prior, Victor Walker was still in charge, yet with a turn, the leadership had changed. It wasn't convenient to ask in front of everyone. Ultimately, they were only focused on Victor Walker. As long as Victor Walker was involved, it didn't matter who was in charge. Long & Construction Company had prepared the contract in advance, and the head of construction handed a copy to Annie Reeves. Annie Reeves, as if burned, turned to look at Victor Walker, whose gaze was intently fixed on 2 or 3 drawings of the overpass project. She then glanced at Yvonne West, who, from behind, seemed to lack the courage to even look at her. Good heavens, the pressure was overwhelming from the start. How could she be expected to handle this without any briefing whatsoever? The so-called contract signing was just a glorified haggling session, no different from bargaining at a market. Surely there should be a set price, with upper and lower limits, right? CEO Reeves, the current economic situation isn't great, money isn't easy to come by, is it? CEO Henry Davis of Long & observing Annie Reeves's every expression, said with a sly smile. The path to making money through construction projects is even more challenging, with countless construction companies vying for work. This year, our company has taken on several projects, and working capital is particularly tight. Regarding the contract, we previously agreed that if we won the bid, the project price would include a 5% commission. If not, a 50,000-unit hardship fee. With CEO Walker's talent, of course, we couldn't lose. It's just that my company's finances are a bit strained. Could we perhaps change that 5% to 3%? These 2 sections of the project were of considerable value, amounting to hundreds of millions. Based on that percentage, the thought alone was painful. Annie Reeves was momentarily stunned. Opening the contract, she saw that the figure was indeed astronomical. She glanced again at Victor Walker, whose demeanor remained unchanged. The muscles in her face tightened, her scalp tingling. Victor Walker seemed unconcerned. If things went south, it wouldn't be entirely her fault. CEO Henry Davis, what you say isn't wrong. With the economy in such a state, it's certainly necessary to cut costs in various areas. With such a long-established construction company, your staff must be exceptionally skilled. Why the need to outsource this contract and pay external fees? The 4 Long & Company representatives were taken aback by Annie Reeves's words. Did this woman understand the situation at all? This was a 2-for-1 deal, how could she refuse to sell? Victor Walker's face began to tighten, his lips pressed firmly together. CEO Henry Davis chuckled dryly. CEO Reeves is quite the joker. No matter how skilled a project engineer is, they can't be compared to CEO Walker. A project of this magnitude requires CEO Walker's expertise. If CEO Walker insists that only CEO Walker can handle this, are you suggesting the contract isn't worth the price? It was over. Like a scholar arguing with a soldier, reason wouldn't prevail. CEO Henry Davis clenched his jaw, looking to Victor Walker for help. Victor Walker didn't meet his gaze. Yvonne West, who was taking notes, glanced surreptitiously at Annie Reeves. Remembering her own designs on Victor Walker, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of fear. The atmosphere in the meeting room became tense. Another vice president whispered in CEO Henry Davis's ear. CEO Henry Davis stared at Annie Reeves, reluctantly resigning himself to the situation. CEO Reeves, all right. Although this is our first collaboration, let's each take a step back. 4 per 1,000 is our maximum. If that works, we'll sign immediately. If not, we'll wait for another opportunity. Annie Reeves, at a loss, discreetly kicked Yvonne West. Yvonne West, sitting beside her, was equally helpless. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she anxiously nudged Victor Walker. Victor Walker finally looked up, turning to smile at CEO Henry Davis. Under the table, he took Annie Reeves's hand and wrote in her palm, "What's up?" His fingertips brushed against her skin, sending a tingling sensation through her. The intimacy of the gesture made Annie Reeves blush. "What's the lowest we can go?" Annie Reeves's hand was burning. Victor Walker calmly wrote a 6. Annie Reeves's mouth formed a perfect O. Has CEO Reeves given this careful consideration? CEO Henry Davis looked at the beautiful woman before him. 6%. That's our final offer. CEO Henry Davis glanced at the other vice president, utterly astonished. CEO Reeves, are you joking? Victor Walker still held Annie Reeves's hand. She tried to pull away but couldn't. Afraid of being seen, she couldn't make any sudden movements, forced to let him have his way. "I'm completely serious. We have our reasons for this offer. If CEO Henry Davis can accept it, we'll have a pleasant collaboration." CEO Henry Davis's eyes narrowed to slits. CEO Reeves is indeed a bold one. This is a significant matter. We'll need to report back. Of course. We'll be in touch. Annie Reeves's voice dropped slightly, sensing the deal slipping away. CEO Reeves, you should also reconsider. Such a percentage is unheard of. CEO Reeves, you're still quite young. As the Long and Company representatives left, CEO Henry Davis turned back to speak. As long as Long and Company wins the bid, my age is irrelevant. Annie Reeves smiled, waving goodbye, noticing the tension in CEO Henry Davis's face. The car was long gone, the people departed. Only her small shadow remained on the snowy steps. She stretched out her hand, staring at it blankly. A trace of warmth lingered in her palm from her contact with Victor Walker, a touch that had left her breathless. She couldn't help but feel a surge of anger, pushing the door open and striding in. Victor Walker had quickly returned to his desk. Standing beside it, she hissed, "Why didn't you tell me the price beforehand, in the meeting?" Her voice was low, meant only for his ears. "Because you're in charge of this project, the decision is naturally yours." Victor Walker leisurely examined the blueprint in his hand. But, isn't 6 per thousand really high? It's never been this high. Then why did you even suggest it to me? I merely offered a suggestion. The decision, as I said, rests with you. You knew damn well I was clueless. You deliberately set me up to fail this project, didn't you? Her furious gaze could have burned holes through him. We haven't received an official response yet, so why assume it's a failure? Have a little faith in yourself. Victor Walker finished, then buried his head back in the blueprint. CEO Reeves, when you have a moment, could you come by the valuation team? Accountant Richard Jones approached, holding the accounting department's ledger. Give it to CEO Walker first. Then me. Annie Reeves' anger simmered, finding no outlet. I don't manage that part. I'm swamped. Victor Walker said, his eyes still glued to the blueprint. Victor Walker. Annie Reeves glared at him again, breathing heavily before spinning around and storming upstairs. Victor Walker sighed, a wry smile touching his lips. He shouldn't have let her realize that when he gripped her hand, his body had actually reacted. Damn it, heaven knew how much he missed her, body and soul. Bella West, basking in the afterglow of romance, suddenly called Annie Reeves, asking to meet at the Nan Nin bookstore. At that moment, Annie Reeves was shaking hands with CEO Henry Davis of Long and Company, both parties preparing to sign 2 copies of the contract. CEO Henry Davis, without further ado, shook Victor Walker's hand firmly, his expression serious. CEO Walker, this is the biggest concession Long and Company has made since its establishment. I look forward to a fruitful collaboration. Victor Walker replied succinctly, rest assured. His smile was cool and composed. Annie Reeves, standing beside him, couldn't resist stealing a glance at his cheekbone, noting the arrogance radiating from his eyes. That evening, they had initially planned to host a dinner for CEO Henry Davis and his team, but they were eager to return to Beijing for work. They agreed to meet again on the bidding day and said their goodbyes. As soon as CEO Henry Davis's group left, the office buzzed with excitement. The employees cheered, wanting to celebrate, partly for CEO Reeves' success. They looked expectantly at Annie Reeves, who had her back turned, talking to Bella West. Ending the call, she headed upstairs to grab her bag, oblivious to the commotion in the office. The employees dejectedly returned to their desks. "It's not too late to celebrate after we win the bid," Victor Walker announced. "Everyone still has other projects. The bidding day for the Daikyo overpass isn't far off, and with the new year approaching, I'm afraid overtime is inevitable." While Annie Reeves held the highest position, everyone understood that Victor Walker was the true backbone of the office. "CEO Walker, overtime is no problem, as long as we get a bigger bonus at the end of the year." Supervisor Matthew Parker voiced everyone's sentiment. Victor Walker chuckled, typing on his keyboard. Seeing Annie Reeves hurrying down, he stood up. "CEO Reeves, the office is working overtime tonight." Annie Reeves patted her handbag, blinked a few times. "Yeah. Did they want her to chip in or not?" "CEO Reeves, what kind of boxed meal do you prefer? Chicken? Ribs? Seafood?" Accountant Richard Jones, in charge of dinner arrangements, asked. Victor Walker's office didn't have a separate dining area. Lunch was at the main cafeteria next door. The cafeteria didn't serve dinner, so for overtime, they ordered boxed meals from an outside restaurant. I have a date, so, no need to prepare anything for me tonight." Annie Reeves suddenly felt ashamed, as if she'd forgotten everyone and gone off to have fun on her own. She didn't dare look at everyone's faces, escaping from the office like a fugitive. CEO Reeves. Yvonne West mustered the courage to chase after her. Annie Reeves stopped, looking back at her glumly. Yvonne West stumbled towards her, her face flushed. "CEO Reeves, what happened before was because I was young and foolish. I'm so sorry. Can you forgive me?" For some reason, a pang of bitterness shot through Annie Reeves' heart. So many things, if only a simple apology could make them go away, how wonderful that would be. "You don't need my forgiveness. As long as you don't feel any guilt in your heart, that's enough." This Yvonne West girl, she valued love above all else, thinking that everything she did was right. Loving someone wasn't wrong, but one had to know that sometimes, love could also hurt others. "I'm incredibly remorseful. CEO Reeves, rest assured, I no longer have any feelings for CEO Walker. I'll work hard. Will you and CEO Walker treat me like any other employee?" Annie Reeves smiled. So this wasn't a sincere apology, but a probe. If she wasn't CEO Reeves today, what would Yvonne West's attitude be like in front of her? People were pragmatic, and that wasn't wrong. What was wrong was that she realized it too late. "You don't need to worry about anything. I'm just a passerby in this office." Annie Reeves gave Yvonne West a dose of reassurance, then turned, hailed a taxi, and hurried away. The Nan Nin bookstore was tucked away in a bustling area, a considerable distance but hard to find, its exterior decorated in a simple, classical style. Inside were rows of bookshelves, each category clearly displayed, the entire bookstore swept clean without a speck of dust. The staff member looked like a young lad, a white shirt covered by a dark apron. The bookstore was incredibly quiet, and the staff spoke in hushed tones. Annie Reeves stepped inside and immediately fell in love with the place. She looked around, didn't see Bella West, casually picked a book off the shelf, flipped through it, and absent-mindedly, through a gap in the bookshelves, she saw a small space in the back with a few small coffee tables. The tables and chairs were heavy, dark wood, Western style, with an aristocratic air. There were fresh flowers on the tables, and a chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a calming light, making one feel relaxed and open-minded, yet separated from the outside, creating a tranquil space. She couldn't help but walk in and saw a refined man sitting inside, a stack of books in front of him, his focused expression making her heart pound. Lance Carter. Annie Reeves wondered, why was he here? While she was still puzzled, she saw a middle-aged woman walk towards him. This woman wore a black dress, her skin was fair, and it was apparent she wasn't wearing makeup, only a touch of light lipstick. Her hair was casually tied back, and she wore no jewelry. This lack of deliberate adornment wasn't arrogance, but elegance, even giving off a homely vibe. Annie Reeves was stunned. She had seen this woman in Lance Carter's album, only much younger then, standing next to a 20-year-old Lance Carter, holding hands. The woman brought a cup of coffee, gently placing it on Lance Carter's table. Lance Carter looked up and smiled back, a silent understanding passing between them. Lance Carter gestured for her to sit down, and they began to chat, sometimes pensive, sometimes smiling, their voices soft, making it impossible to hear what they were saying. Jealous? A sudden voice startled Annie Reeves, nearly making her cry out. Turning her head, she saw Bella West and Alex West standing behind her. Let me introduce you, this is her best friend. Bella West gave the young man a charming smile. The young man nodded at Annie Reeves. Go explore and let your mind and body wander, learn something new. Annie and I need to talk. Bella West subtly dismissed the young man, pulling Annie Reeves to a corner of the room. She pulled out 2 small chairs, and they sat down. Tell me, isn't the world small? I asked Lance Carter to meet me here to wait for you, and it turns out the bookstore owner is an acquaintance of his, and quite close at that. Bella West carefully observed Annie Reeves. Be honest, are you bothered? To say she wasn't bothered would be a lie, but she wasn't overly upset either, just a little disappointed. They seem very comfortable with each other, she replied nonchalantly. Yes, they are indeed the same type of people. But, Annie, do you feel it? Lance Carter is polite, humble, and undemanding to everyone else, but when he looks at you, there's an excitement in his expression he can't seem to suppress. What are you talking about? Annie Reeves gave her friend a sharp look, a wry smile on her face. Annie, my mom told me to stop setting you up with people. I've been pestering her for ages, but she won't breathe a word. Could it be she also knows about Lance Carter pursuing you? Don't be ridiculous. Annie Reeves sighed, then briefly recounted the story of Victor Walker giving her shares and how she reluctantly returned to Victor Walker's office as the boss. Bella West's eyes widened, almost popping out of her head. Victor Walker wants you back. I knew you'd say that. That's not the point. I told him I was about to accept another man, and he even congratulated me. Bella West scolded, Girl, don't be so naive. Victor Walker is a remarkable man. Don't board a pirate ship and then thank them. I'm worried about Lance Carter. Annie Reeves's eyes suddenly reddened as she looked out the door. Annie, did I say something wrong? Bella West gently shook her shoulders. Babe, if one day you married someone, and in a life-or-death moment, you reached out to him for help, and he just pushed you away, would you still love him? I know you've been hurt a lot, and it's my fault, I shouldn't have brought this up. Oh, I haven't married anyone outstanding, but I've dated at least 8 or 9 guys, none any better. If things don't work out, we break up, the horse doesn't stop for flowers under the moon, life's too short. After so many breakups, I've become numb, so I don't feel anyone is that important. 3-legged toads are hard to find, but 2-legged men are everywhere, half the world is the same. Seeing you like this, I don't even dare to get married. I'll never forget the pain I felt that day, not even in death. There were always women after him, and I wasn't strong enough, nor did I want to be the wife who snoops through phones and messages, demanding to know whose perfume or lipstick he was wearing. That kind of life, even if it were paved with gold, I wouldn't want it for a single day. So, what about you and Lance Carter? Annie Reeves lowered her head slightly, flipping through the book. Right now, I'm not thinking about accepting anyone's love, I want to learn to love myself first. Bella West stared at her for a long moment, saying nothing, just patting her shoulder. Annie, when did you get here? Lance Carter and the woman passed by the bookshelf and spotted Bella West and Annie Reeves sitting in the corner. My girlfriend, Annie Reeves, the owner of Nan Nin, Sarah Collins, and my high school friend. Lance Carter introduced them to Annie Reeves. Lance Carter was just singing your praises, but now that I've met you, I realize he was being far too modest. Sarah Collins was a smooth talker, her voice incredibly gentle. Bring a cup of coffee over here. No need, I'm taking Annie to dinner. Bella, where's your niece? Lance Carter glanced inside, taking Annie Reeves' hand quite naturally. Sarah Collins chuckled softly. Your niece and I will get out of your hair, let's each take care of our own dates, and not disturb each other. Bella West said slyly. Lance Carter and Annie Reeves said their goodbyes together, and Sarah Collins saw them out of the bookstore. The bustling street offered a plethora of restaurants, and they chose one serving fish stew. The chef was quite skilled, the stew perfectly seasoned. After a while, Annie Reeves' nose was beaded with sweat, the spice tingling on her tongue. How was work at the office today? Lance Carter dotingly poured her a glass of yogurt. Annie Reeves' chopsticks, poised over the fish, trembled. It seemed she hadn't yet told Lance Carter about her job transfer. Without any hesitation, she casually mentioned signing the unusual contract with Long & Company. Victor Walker is truly exceptional, confident and astute. Against such a formidable opponent, one can only surrender. Lance Carter remarked. My heart was in my throat all afternoon, afraid I'd mess up that big project. When I got the call from Long & I went to tell Victor Walker. His expression was calm, and everyone else was smiling. That's when I realized he'd anticipated the outcome all along. Standing there, I felt like a fool. One Victor Walker in the office is enough, you don't need to be that smart. Lance Carter reassured her, taking her hand. So, can you relax tonight? Annie Reeves shook her head, I have to go back to the office and check on things. They're all working overtime there. Lance Carter raised an eyebrow, Annie, you're putting too much pressure on yourself. Tell me, if you weren't at Victor Walker's office, would things still run smoothly? Of course. Annie Reeves replied with absolute certainty. So what are you worried about? Her expression was distracted, her brow furrowed. I'm just a little uneasy. She bit her lip. Lance Carter withdrew his hand, silently taking a sip of beer. All right, after we finish eating, I'll take you back to the office. A moment later, Lance Carter spoke, his expression pained. They left the restaurant, and Lance Carter stood on the street, not rushing to the car, but pulling her towards a steamed bun shop in a small alley. Buy a few boxes of steamed buns for your staff to eat as a late-night snack, a little bribe. He instructed the bun shop owner to carefully pack them, not to crush them, and to add all sorts of decorations. Annie Reeves watched him from behind, suddenly reaching out and hugging his waist, her face pressed tightly against him, like a child, clinging to him, not letting go for a long time. The owner of the steamed bun shop kept smiling. So childish. Lance Carter said, stroking Annie Reeves' hand. All right, let's take these while they're still hot. Okay. She took the small bag. After the car started moving, she continued to look at Lance Carter. He reached out and gently stroked her hair. Is there something you want to ask me? I'm waiting for you to tell me. Sarah Collins is my first love, she married a soldier. After her husband left the army, he was assigned to work in Tanjong City, and she followed him here. We haven't seen each other in a long time. Lance Carter, I really don't want to disappoint you. Annie Reeves looked away, turning towards the darkness outside. Between us, there's only love or no love, there's no such thing as disappointment. Annie, whatever you decide, I'll support you. The car turned and stopped in front of Victor Walker's office. Lance Carter looked at his watch. It's 8 o'clock now, I'll pick you up at 10. 2 hours is enough to put on a show for others, no arguments. Lance Carter, why don't you come in with me? Annie Reeves hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke. Lance Carter got out, opened the door, and stood beside her, saying, Annie, if you love someone, you'll never make them worry. See you in 2 hours. Lance Carter's car disappeared into the night. She collected herself and carried the bag of steamed buns into the brightly lit office. As the glass door chimed, the employees who were busy working all looked up at once, and Victor Walker's eyes lit up. I bought everyone some steamed buns. Take a break. Annie Reeves wasn't used to being stared at like this. Everyone cheered enthusiastically, abandoning their work and rushing over to choose what they liked. Annie Reeves took out 2 pomegranate and diced water chestnut-filled steamed buns and offered them to Victor Walker. Is it cold outside? Victor Walker asked, his voice hoarse. Annie Reeves shook her head and turned away, slightly embarrassed. Everything was so familiar. Victor Walker loved these buns the most, how could she forget? The corners of Victor Walker's mouth turned up, maintaining a cheerful expression all evening. After finishing the buns, everyone returned to their positions. Everyone else was busy. Annie Reeves looked around, what should she do? She'd studied engineering, but hadn't touched it in years. Thrown into this, it was hard to get up to speed. She could only pour tea, shuffle papers, basically an office gopher. Glancing around, she easily spotted Victor Walker. He was engrossed in reviewing documents, comparing blueprints, not circling or marking anything, but jotting down figures in a notebook. Others, encountering problems, came to him for advice. He'd listen, ponder a moment, then quietly explain, the questioner occasionally nodding. Were all his late nights like this? She'd never checked before. Annie Reeves felt a pang, quickly turning away. After 10, everyone started yawning, saving files, shutting down computers, tidying up, and gradually leaving. Victor Walker remained at his computer, unmoving. Finally, only he and she were left in the office. Through the glass door, Annie Reeves could see Lance Carter's car waiting outside. Reluctantly, she approached Victor. Aren't you going home? She asked Victor Walker. Victor Walker looked up, rubbing his eyes. Just finishing this, then I'll go. Oh, do you have to leave? I'll walk you out. No need, I have a friend waiting outside. Saying this, Annie Reeves felt a twinge of cruelty. Victor Walker's eyes narrowed, the joy he'd held all evening visibly draining away.